Glad to see everybody tonight. I was getting a little worried. It was 5:30 and no one was here yet. Usually people are here eating supper. And so, but I'm glad you're here. And for our brothers in Uganda, very glad you're tuned in with us as well. So before we get started, I want to introduce Brother Tom Howe to you. He is our Texas Baptist BGCT rep for church planting, church starting, right? Yeah, those are different. I learned fairly recently that church planting, church starting are two different areas, but
well, they're interchangeable for me. So.
Yeah, for you.
Yeah,
but, okay. So, but would you like to say a few words to the guys? Sure. Yeah. So last year, Tom was able to come and be a part of a class and share a little bit. So he's going to share a little, and then you're going to see a guy look just like him come up in a little bit. And he didn't change clothes for you guys in Uganda. It's going to be a different guy here. So yeah.
So I'm the director of church starting, or we say church planning, and I don't know what the difference is, but some people seem like they do somewhere. And I've been with Texas Baptist for about 3 years. I've been a pastor about 30 years, counting those 3. I just finished an interim where I was in First Baptist White Settlement for a couple of years. And finished that up and pastored in Alabama and in Texas. My East Texas accent wasn't bad enough. I put some Alabama on it. Then I came back, pastored in Fort Worth for a little while. I love being part of church starting. So we get to oversee the church starts that happen here in Texas. We have about 50 or 60 per year that get started. With COVID being this year, we'll be a little bit under that number, but I anticipate next year we'll be back in kind of full strength. This is what I hope and I think. And so I know a whole lot more about y'all than y'all know about me, because I've been very involved with the CPCs, or acts we have here, the training and the associations. I taught the second one that was done like this. The first one was done in Houston. The second one that was done was in Fort Worth, and I was a pastor at the church leading it at the time. We did it through a church instead of through the association. We were tied to the Tarrant Baptist Association. This is near my heart, because I love, my twin will be here in a minute. Our dad is a pastor, has been a pastor all of our lives, mostly bivocational pastor. He lives in this area. He lives in Temple, he and my mom. And so this has been extremely important to me. Church starting is important. Pastor training is important. And even though I've done it for 30 years, there's so much I need to learn. So I just appreciate those who are willing to just kind of be at an always learning level. And you may or may not see me, or you may or may not see my name, but if you're involved in church starting in Texas Baptist, my fingers are all over your stuff. So whether you realize it or not. And there's a process that goes into all that I don't want to get into now. But just thank you for being here and supporting what Carl's doing. And thank you, Carl, for having me.
No problem.
Just a question.
Yes.
How many did you say start per year?
We typically do about, last year we had 49, I think, and then normally it's about 60. We are starting churches also outside of the state of Texas, so that has been a change the last couple of years.
Have you had enough data to know how long they last?
We do. We have pretty accurate data, and part of what we're trying to do is improve that legacy.
Yeah.
But our percentages have been pretty solid. At the 5-year mark, we're at 96%. At the 7-year mark, we're at at 10-year mark, we're at 89%. So we've had some that closed down. And what's shocking to me in COVID, we have 280 churches in our 5-year process, somewhere in that process. We fund for 3 years. And we have a 5-year process. So it's a couple of years, you're not really getting monthly funding, but we're still involved if you need us and stuff like that. Some churches do, some don't. We've only had 2 out of 280 that have closed because of COVID. Now we've got about 6 that are tinkering or teetering.
Yeah.
We don't know if they're gonna make it or not. We've had others that have just been a hard year. Y'all all know that. It's been a very hard year. But we've only had 2 that just closed their doors so far because of COVID. So that's a good number, I think. Some of those are stronger than others. Some are very strong, and some are not. And depending on whatever definition you use by that, some are big, some are smaller, and they're built for different things, and that's okay too. So I can go a lot more detail about the process and some of that, but we won't do that today. Good question.
So that was great. That was Brother Tom, and we'll have his Brother Tim, come up in a minute. But I want to go ahead and take the prayer request, because once I turn it over to him, I want him to run with it. It'll just be him, and I'm going to sit down and learn tonight as well. So, and I'm one of those church planters. We launched right in the middle of COVID, so it has been a struggle, and we're still. We have a family meeting coming up this Sunday where we are going to just completely revamp the way we've been doing things, and I think church planting has changed. COVID has changed church planting. That'd probably be a better way to do it. And so we're examining some of the things that have come about. But let's take up some prayer requests. Remember, if it needs to directly affect you, so that way we're praying for our individuals here. And if it is something that's from an extended, tell us how it affects you so we can be praying for you as well.
Praise in the prayer.
Okay, good.
Praise kind of, I'd already decided to share it, but it kind of goes with what was just talked about in my last church. We planted several churches.
Mhm.
Our first church turned 15 this last week, and the way it affects me is it's a very strong evangelistic church, and my daughter's a member there. So that legacy has come back to where my daughter's very involved in the
Great.
church. So that means a lot to me as a father.
Yeah, yeah, amen.
And then the prayer request is I have some potential ministry opportunities that have presented themselves, and just praying for God's will and wisdom
Okay.
from both sides.
All right. Brother Cody has pastored in our association, and so I'm sure it has something to do with that. So we'll definitely be praying for you for that area. I do want to give an update on our church planter, Larry Robert. I visited with him in person this past week. The doctors have not cleared him to be in public yet because he still has a little fluid on his lungs. He had a double bypass and developed some pneumonia and fluid, and they don't want to clear him yet. So he is actually behind on his report, and we're trying to get him caught up and have a growth review meeting with him. But the good news is he in right after he had double bypass, his wife had a pacemaker put in. So they are both still in recovery, but I did get to visit with him in person, and he actually rode his motorcycle. The doctor cleared him to ride his motorcycle. So that has lifted his spirits a lot. So I couldn't convince him to go on a ride, but anyway, so one of our planters is about to be back in the pulpit again, which is good.
That's great.
So what else?
I have a praise just that my mom's surgery went well.
Well, okay.
She had her post-op appointment today, and retina's looking good.
Good. We've been praying for your mom
Thank
actually
you.
off and on for a good while. now.
Yes.
So prayed for her last week for her surgery.
Thank you.
So what else? Hey, not too bad today as far as praises were as many as prayer requests. That's always a good thing. Well, let me pray for us, and then Brother Tim Howe is going to come up, and I'm going to let him do a bow on himself because he knows himself better than I do. Not biopsy. Will, yeah. That's why you're sitting by the pastor's wife, so she can smack.
Oh, she just laughed along with me. That's good.
Yeah, she laughed with you, so let me pray for Brother Cody and for Larry and Gina to continue to recover, and then we will start the class. Lord, it is so good to be in your presence, and we thank you for what you're doing in and through our state convention, through our association, through this church planting center. And Lord, I just pray that tonight you would just help us to clear our hearts, clear our minds, be ready for what Brother Tim has for us. We thank you for our partners in Uganda and for their commitment, and I just pray your blessing over them tonight. And Lord, I lift Brother Cody up to you and thank you for his calling and for the way you've used him in ministry, and for the praise report on church plant that he helped to start and that his daughter is continuing to serve in. What a praise. But Lord, I just pray that this ministry opportunity you have for him, that he would hear clearly from you whether he's supposed to endeavor in it or not. Lord, I just pray that you would speak very loud and clear to him, yes or no. And Lord, we thank you for Larry Robert, for Miss Gina, and that they are ready to get back in church in their Larry in the pulpit, preaching your word and growing that new church. I just pray your hand on them, and that they will be back in church soon. Lord, just be with us now as Brother Tim comes and speak through him. Use him tonight to just educate us, to equip us, to help us to be better church members, church planters, pastors. Just use him tonight in a powerful way. We lift all these things up to you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
All right, Brother Tim, if you'll come, and then from now on, it's all yours. Yeah,
It's on your schedule.
yeah, when you feel it's a good place to take a break, we'll take one. I'll pause the tape so that they don't have to watch us.
Well, welcome. Well, I guess I'm welcome, I suppose. I don't know. I'm glad to be here. It's a pleasure to meet all you guys and the guys who are in Uganda as well, whoever's watching here. I'm Tim Howe, not Tom Howe. We do look a little bit alike. I won't let you say who's the better looking one. We don't want to say names, okay? But I'm Tom's twin brother. I almost mixed it up myself. My bio I want to give, I did have a biopsy 5 weeks ago. I'd rather not go through all that again, so I'm not going to do that. But my bio is I've been in ministry for as long as Tom has, basically about 31 years. And most of that, even though I grew up in Texas, has been outside of Texas. God called me to missions, and I've been doing mission work in the United States on the West Coast and overseas in the Mediterranean world. And most of that has been connected to church planting. So you guys are speaking my language. I want to hear a little bit about you, just to know who you are in just a few moments. Briefly, what I do now, I coordinate church planting in Metro Seattle area. I say Metro Seattle because it's not just Seattle. Really, we have more people, more territory that's rural and far away from the city. People that don't ever want to be in the city of Seattle. And then we actually have territory within Seattle, but our population base is the city. And so, we kind of cover it all. So we do church planting in a very urban context, stuff that you guys see in the news. That's where I walk, when they're burning Westlake Center and all that. That's one of the places I had lunch the next day, by the way. It makes it look like on the news the city's burning down. I literally had a hot dog in that spot the next day. But anyway, news doesn't quite portray that. They just show me my hot dog. But we're also, our two biggest works that we have going on right now are our Spanish speaking network and we call them cowboy churches, but that's a misnomer because it's really more equestrian or outdoor related churches. And you wouldn't necessarily think of that when you think of Seattle. We have this year, we thought with COVID that we would be a lot less churches planted. We really expected to be none. In fact, we shifted our entire focus from planting churches to being pastor support because we just felt like we were going to lose a lot of pastors. We did lose 11 of our pastors quit. Probably I could say directly related to COVID. And 2 of those were our church planters. 9 of those were our traditional pastors that quit and not ready to go find another job or something. It was too much. And we had all kinds of problems you've heard in your churches or other churches, right? That happened in a lot of our churches as well. But we still advanced the kingdom. And so we found in Metro Seattle, we were able to plant 13 churches in the last year. And in the Northwest Baptist Convention, which is our state convention, we're Washington, Oregon, and Northern Idaho, a little stovepipe of Idaho is part of our state convention. So you have, well, I guess in Texas, you have 2 state conventions. Most states, I think you have 1, but we have 1 state convention for 2.5 states. Wow. And we have about 500 churches in those 2.5 states. So you just immediately get an understanding of how few churches we have, because I think you have about 10 times that many in Texas in just the BGCT and probably another 5 times that many in the SBTC. We're about the least churched region of the United States of America. In fact, at one time, 15 years ago, Seattle was the least churched metropolitan center in the US. Second was San Francisco, third was Portland. God's done some great stuff. We've done a lot of church planting efforts. We've gone from 3% church to 4% church in Seattle, and we are no longer the least church city in the United States. We're the 4th least church city in the United States. San Francisco is ahead of us, and Portland's ahead of us, and Boston's ahead of us. But the northwestern part of the United States and the northeastern part of the United States are very similar in their spirituality, with a slight change. The Northeast was founded, if you know American history, it was founded on Christian principles. Christianity just never really made it to the Northwest.
That's right.
We're still pre-Christian. Whereas much of America is becoming post-Christian, we are still pre-Christian. We've never had the majority of our population ever identify as Christian. It's never happened in the Northwest. The total number of people that go to any church of any sort is probably about 11% in our area. The largest denomination would be Catholic, the second largest would be Mormon, probably Lutheran after that. Baptists are gaining ground. But on any given Sunday, we speculate somewhere between 25 and 30,000 people in our state convention goes to a Baptist church. That's 11 million people. So it just gives you a percentage of what it looks like for our state convention and the challenges we have in front of us. But God is doing good work. And like I said, we went from 3% church to 4% church in a 15-year period. And that's 45,000 people. That's evangelical, it's not just Baptists. But that's 45,000 souls that have entered into the kingdom of heaven. And we feel like God's done some great things. You're sharing some of the numbers. Our numbers aren't quite as rosy, but we feel like promising numbers. Our church plant success rate, if you want to call it that, I really hate that term because what is success? It's different in the eyes of different people and certainly different in the eyes of the Lord. But we see that our church plants that make it to year 5, somewhere around 80%, 75 to 85%. It's in a range because any few years it's a little different. Our biggest hurdle is getting them from 5 years to 10 years. And we have a bigger drop off after that. And so we're trying to figure that out still. And this came out of an effort. So what I'm going to be sharing with you tonight is called Exegete Your Community, Engage Your Community. The first term might be a term you're familiar with or not familiar with. So let me explain what that is. It comes from a Greek word that if you're doing a biblical study in Greek, typically you might hear the phrase an exegesis or to exegete your text. And that means basically you're digging in deep in the Greek understanding of it. You understand the background. And you want to understand the understanding of the text from out of the text, exo means to come out of, versus you bring your own thoughts to the text and you go preach your hobby horse. It's kind of where the idea comes from, an idea of exegesis. And so we began to look at our community. How can we understand our community to best reach our community? Especially if you're speaking about a situation where the community just doesn't know Jesus. I tell stories and I like to watch the look on people's faces. They just can't believe this is possibly true. I went and got my hair cut a few years ago. And then I was sitting at the place and the lady asked me, what do you do for a living? This is in the United States of America. What do you do for a living? I said, I'm a pastor. And she goes, oh, okay. She cut my hair. She goes, what's that? Is that like IT? And I said, no, I lead a church. And it was, I sort of expected her to not want to talk to me after that, but then at least she didn't know what I did. So at least got some interest in her. She goes, what's that, like IT? I said, no, I lead a church. I coordinate the ministries of a church. She goes, oh, what's a church? And I said, it's a religious organization that helps people to try to see, who is God and how is he working in our life. And she goes, silent for a long while. She's processing what I'm saying. Okay. Young woman, she's probably less than 40. She's trying to process what I'm saying. Is that the folks who wear the orange robes? And it dawned on me, her only space that she could put religion in were monks, Buddhist monks that she'd seen on some show. The guys who wore orange robes. I said, yeah, it's kind of like that, but different, because I was able to share a little bit about our faith. That's the world that I live in. Now, how do I just show up and start preaching Jesus in the context where and then she wasn't even familiar with the guys in the orange robes. She'd heard of them, at least, So it gives me kind of the frame, gives you the frame of where we're trying to work. Well, Exegete Your Community is not our deal. It's one we borrowed from a guy named Barry. You see his name right there, Barry Whitworth. He is the executive director of the New Jersey, Pennsylvania Southern Baptist State Convention. And he kind of came up with this because they were trying to figure out how can we plant more churches in an area that's just almost as challenging as ours. And so we did a joint conference with them. We liked what he did. And so we started to adopt it for ourselves. And we've modified it. And so I want to present to you tonight kind of one of the things we do is when you say you want to plant a church, I mean, I could ask you guys, what do people tell you when you say you're part of a church plan? It's like, don't we already have enough churches? Well, you don't like the guys at that church, you want to go to your own, and people give you all these things, right? And so we kind of had to come up with the whole framework. Why are we doing what we're doing? Why do we need to do what we're doing? And this is what grew out of this. So I'm going to share with you tonight kind of what we did and how we adapted it. You have a copy of this to take with you. It's completely yours to do with or learn from or adapt, not use. Anyway, I have some PowerPoints that we're going to walk through here in just a few moments. Before we do, I want to just kind of get a sense of who you guys are. So I'm going to ask you just if you could share with me your name. We'll just start over here and just sit on the front row and in the back, and then you don't have to say some of who you are. But you just share like who you are, what you're doing, why you're here tonight, and that helps me to know who you guys all are. Why don't you start with us?
Sure. Carl Hudson, I'm a retired bivocational pastor. Spent many years north of Spokane, on the
Where?
Canadian border, in a town called Colville.
I know where Colville is.
You're kidding. You have to
I don't recall
know,
those,
that
yeah.
town has maybe 4,000 people.
I don't recall
It's
those.
totally on the opposite end of the state from Seattle. Totally different culture than Seattle.
It is. I was just out there with him, not in
North
Colorado,
of
but we
Spokane.
were outside of Spokane.
Wow.
Close to Falls,
Spokane and
yeah.
then up to Coeur d'Alene.
Yep, that's right. I know those areas.
All right.
But anyway, moved here, my company in Rockdale, Texas, and then retired from there, moved here.
Excellent. And you are involved in church starting, church planting, no, church planting?
No, I'm with the association,
association,
here, but
excellent.
I appreciate Cross. I like to sit in this from time. to
Great.
time.
We're glad to have you with us, Dan. What you guys?
My name's Sylvester, this is my wife Tina. We're starting churches on reservations.
You want to move to
July
Washington?
Yes.
What?
Do you want to move to Washington?
Why?
We have 27 reservations in our
Well,
state.
but that's not the one God sent me to.
Okay.
Wait, no,
Well, we have work on two of them.
Washington
is. And we have work on two of them right now. I'm gonna tell you right now, when I walk on a reservation,
They don't like it.
no, he's not even joking. It's not that, there's no trust. There can't be any trust. You know the history, right, guys?
You're talking about 500 years of being missions.
Exactly. And so my efforts, my success rate on any reservation in Washington State or any state or Idaho is, I mean, it's not even worth the effort, to be honest with you. And people just mistreat me. There's no trust. There's nothing built there, trust by. There's a guy named Gary Hawkins. He's up in Oklahoma. He came up there and me just walking with Gary, and he's from the Cree Nation. It just opened up all had conversations, and we were invited to be at the Muckleshoot. They have tribal lands there that they just allowed us to do some stuff, you know. Anyway, I won't steal any of your guys. That's God bless you guys. So you're doing work here in Texas.
He didn't mention Washington because God doesn't want us to go there.
Well, we do have
I'm so
more.
homesick, I cannot.
We do
stand
have word with
Washington,
reservations.
suppose that.
There's a lot of
He's
needs
actually gonna be
Finished the school
in New Mexico. Okay.
He may change his mind.
We had a couple come from New Mexico. They were from the Navajo Nation. He was from the Navajo Nation. She was from Maya people, and they came up and did some work close to Caldwell. Actually, they were working among the Coeur d'Alene people. So
Yeah.
yeah, excellent. Well, I look forward to chatting with you more about all that. Go ahead.
I'm Will, I'm here to learn and so I can help somebody else out.
All right. All right.
Will's part of Transformation Community Church.
Which is where.
That's, and I'm Catherine last time. This way.
Well-
I'm not sure if I should say that loud, but anyways.
What we're going to share here today actually is more helpful to have the non-pastors on board than it is to have the pastors on board. You know, they get more done. I'll just say it that way.
I'm Cody, and I spent 20 years in the Army before God called me into ministry. Spent 2.5 years fully vocational in Kansas City, and then felt God called me back to Texas, and then bivocational pastor here, and involved in church planning quite a bit. In Virginia, was part of church plant. We planted 5 churches out of our church in Kansas City. In fact, our former pastor is the catalyst there in Kansas City.
Mark?
Matthew.
Matt
Matthew
Marks.
Marks.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Matt Marks, that's right.
Yeah.
Okay, that's right. Good, good, good.
Jason Paget. Don't really have much of a story as far as this. I was invited by Brother Tom Henderson to come in. Kind of new to I guess you could say the church planning stuff. My family and I, we were attending a church that recently dissolved. So we're just kind of floating around, going visiting some others, trying to figure out new home. So.
Excellent.
Chaplain Dave Archer, with Bell County Sheriff's Department. I'm one of your national mental health first aid instructors at CISM training for Bell County Sheriff's Department. Dr. Brian Davis and Steve Cannon out of the prison. I have 2 Men of Honor groups and 2 PTSD Foundation groups, one on and off coast. And I teach a 30-hour certificate course in care and counsel for combat trauma. It's worth 30 credit hours, and Excelsior University has been giving these guys 2 or 3 credit hours. So part of the PTSD Foundation, when they get tired of telling the same story over and over again and get to the place where they're comfortable with it and ready to move on, I introduce the 30-hour certificate, and they get a chance to pick up 2 or 3 credit hours for free. A good kickoff start, and been very blessed to be a tool in the maker's hand. I've seen 6 people who might otherwise have committed suicide, and a number of families who have been transformed by grace. It's a wonderful thing.
Well, it's a pleasure. Glad to have you with us. And we have one of our pastors I've been working with is retiring. He's not quite retirement age in my mind. He's a little bit older than me,
Okay.
but he's retiring, and his goal is to become a chaplain among the police, actually. He's a former police officer, retired as a police officer, has been a pastor now for almost 10 years, and he's retiring to become a chaplain among the police. And then we have another brother of ours that works with moral injury, PTSD, PTSS, and he was the chaplain of chaplains at JBLM Joint Base Lewis before he retired from that role. So maybe you could chat about that.
Amen.
All you guys have something in
Yes,
common. Right?
just listening to your story of the 21 years, 5 months, 11 days, who's counting, retired, and a decade as a contractor, and it's been a pretty amazing journey when you start talking about things like saving people's lives.
Well, we look forward to our
Transformation.
time together.
Romans 12,
Thank
1 through 2, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
You share with us.
Ronnie Garrett, church planner, moved here from the West Coast about 16 years ago. I live in New Braunfels, so I drive 2 hours here, 2 hours back home to get here. Heavily involved in Celebrate Recovery. March 10th, I'll celebrate 15 years of recovery from methamphetamines. And so that's where my heart is, helping those afflicted by drugs and alcohol come into a realization of Jesus Christ and a relationship with him.
Super. You've got to be the most committed if you're going 2 hours.
What about the 15 years sobriety?
That's awesome too. What part of the West Coast?
So I was born and raised in Fresno, California. I migrated. My parents now live in Salem, Oregon. And that's where we ended up last, and now I'm here.
Okay. Well, it's a pleasure to get to know all you guys. Some of you guys, I have at least some proximity. Sam's not terribly far from us in Fresno. My mother-in-law and father-in-law, my father-in-law pastored a church in a town called Visalia, which isn't terribly far from Fresno, so another area somewhere.
So that's where my grandpa pastored a church too, is Visalia. Actually, not Visalia. I don't know if you've ever heard of this small town called London.
I have heard of one.
Okay, so
There's a guy in my church right now from London.
Wow, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, you talk about the hood over there. Boy.
Yep, yep.
Yeah,
Or join the Navy. There's one of American naval bases is in inland California, and that's where he was from. Well, wow, that's exciting. Interesting stuff. Well, it's a pleasure to be here together today. I want to talk about learning about your community and helping others to learn about your community and your church. Carl, I didn't give you a chance. Do you want to share with us? Or?
No,
Sorry.
thank you.
Okay.
It's like saying it all.
This particular program grew out of a strategy. So basically, what their churches, their state conventions trying to figure out, how in the world are we going to start new churches? Where are we going to start new churches? And they set a personal goal of starting 4 churches a year, which may or may not sound like a lot of churches to start, but for their context, it was a lot of churches. But they began to realize if you targeted 4 areas, you're probably not starting 4 churches. And I found that to be true as well. I'm constantly looking at a lot more areas, and I'm reaching a lot more areas than I'm possibly ever going to start a church with. I'm not talking about the places you send a church planter to, and then that does or doesn't happen. I'm talking about the places you have to come up with ideas of where you're even going to start the church in the first place. Or you start talking to individuals that think they may want to start a church, but then God leads them another way, or their skill set shows they're probably better suited for something else, okay? And so they came up with what they call the 16-8-4 strategy. That meant they would begin to investigate 16 different locations. And I'm going to run through this quick. It's not going to be the main point of what we're doing. They would investigate or exegete the culture and community of 16 places they identified. Where do we need a church? Okay. And then out of that, they would identify 8 places. They would identify 8 places that they're engaging with the prospect that they're going to plant a church in those communities. So you start off with 16, and this already tells you that you're not going to survey work that you're going to end up doing work in every time, because you're going to come across a place and say, wow, I'm not a good fit for this place. Or they don't need a church here, like they need a church here. Or they don't need this kind of church here, like the kind of church that I'm going to lead. So you give yourself the ability to let God navigate you to where you should be. And this is true of an organization. but it's also true of all of us as individuals. Because how many times have you felt God called you to do something, but it wasn't clear the first time he called it, and he begins to clarify it for you? And that's true throughout the scriptures. You look at the story of Moses, you look at the story of Samuel, God clarified their calling along the way. And then that usually, in their goal, ended up being 4 areas where they actually went to go plant a church. So 16 places they would exegete, would turn to 8 places they engage with the gospel to see where God's working, with the hope that they would plant 4 churches. And they would try to do that every year. And if you do that every year, and of course, if you're multiplying this process, then you're going to be planting more than 4 churches every year. And so that's kind of the idea behind the 16-page process. It gives you a lot of space. I'm going to zoom through that part. All right. But I do want to ask some questions. You guys are involved at some level of leadership in the church. So I'm going to ask questions, and I'm going to assume some of you guys are starting churches, some of you guys are not, but you've been in ministries, you've been in recovery ministries, you've been on, and these are questions that help us to identify how God's calling us. And these are the questions I'm going to start with you as you begin to think through how you're going to engage other people with this particular process. So how do you know and plan of where you're going to exegete? If you're looking at that 16:8:4, how do you know where you start? And let me change that term for the sake of our conversation. If you've sensed, and maybe think of it this way, if you're talking with someone who thinks God's calling them to ministry, how do they know where to go? How do they know what to do? Who do they know where to? You say, well, God should lead them. Okay, we all agree with that. But how would you counsel someone to investigate where God is leading them in their ministry?
So what we learned in the first parts of the class is demographing, right? Geographing, yeah.
That's a useful tool. In fact, I do that, and I'll explain that. How I use that.
You start off with what you're passionate for in your own part, pray on it, and then things will start clearing up for you as you continue on that
Okay.
and start developing something.
Do something and see where God's at work.
Well, yeah, I
Join
mean,
there.
it may lead you over here, maybe you go here. You got to decide to get
And
something.
demographics give you the starting base for that. All right. What else? What are some other ideas can help you guys?
Sometimes you look where there is no work.
Obviously, go look where there is no work.
We were looking in Iowa, there's whole counties without a gospel church.
Wow.
So, you know, those were the counties we were interested in. Well, where there are people of peace, where's God moving? We see, but the church isn't established. We want to come alongside.
When I worked, so the job I worked overseas was in North Africa. And the country we lived in, when I first moved to the country, I worked in 2 separate countries. One of the countries, when I moved there were 28 Christians in the country. The other country I worked in when I moved there were 200 Christians. And combined in the 2 nations together, there were 7 churches, and the largest church had 16 people coming. Where do you start work in that context? Well, you can kind of throw a stone because there's need everywhere, right? It's kind of like that context you mentioned in Iowa. So, you know, you could say, well, just sort of start a church anywhere, but you still have to have some process to think through. And this is where this process, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Now, you may say, well, that's not our area. You don't know. We got churches on the corner of every corner. Maybe your town does or doesn't have that. Here's the tricky thing, though. Most of us, and this is where I come back to why I think this is a useful tool, even where you're at. Most of us, when we move into a community, think we know that community. Let me change that. When we live in a community, we think we know that community. In fact, one of the things we started doing, we started talking with pastors, is the pastors thought they understood their community worse than the people in the church thought they understood their community, especially people that have lived there for 20 and 30 years. Okay. Now you would say, if you lived in a place for 30 years, you know that community, right? Except for what's happening while you're living there for 30 years.
Changing.
It's constantly changing. What ways is it changing?
Depends on the location. I mean, like for Killeen, you're getting a constant movement of different people, but moving in and out because of the military and.
So the military town, every 3 years, you have a new town.
For the most part, I mean.
Yeah. All right,
I
what are the
feel
ways
like
that
if
can you
you're
change?
involved in that town, right? If you're heavily involved, you're gonna roll with the change and kind of know the change.
Yeah.
I think the problem becomes where you're not involved and you get into your daily routine and only doing your daily routine. You're not really involved in that community, but you think you know the community.
That is certainly true. What our brother just said is absolutely true. When you're not involved in the community, it changes much more rapidly than you imagine it does. Here's the tricky thing of what we have found is even when you're really engaged in the community, it's changing faster than you know. Much more rapidly than you know. And the ways that it could change, let me give you one example. One of them is demographics. So you mentioned demographics. It's a great tool to start with. And it's the precursor to what we're going to talk about tonight. It's a useful tool. But I did the demographics. This was not with a church plant. This was an established church that's trying to figure out, why are we not reaching our community? The community had about 80,000 people in it. There were 2 Southern Baptist churches. This was the larger of the 2, and they ran about 18. They one time used to run a lot more, and they couldn't figure out why they weren't reaching their community. So I did some demographic research on the community, and I came in, I just asked them some questions. So tell me about your town, okay? And I should have done this on you guys tonight. I didn't know exactly what you all did. I could have done it real Broncos or something like that. I said, tell me about your town. They started telling me questions. I said, I'm all proud of our town. We're all proud of our town, right? Or we move, if we could. And so I was hearing a bunch of stuff about why they liked their town. And I said, okay, well, tell me about your town, though. How many people live in your town? Give me numbers. Well, I have the statistics. They were off by about 20%. Because our towns are growing. In most cases, not always, though. You may live in a town that's not growing. But Central Texas is not one of those places, right? Your population's exploding. I said, okay, well, how much does a house cost here? And they all told me a number. And it was amazing. Their numbers didn't match. But you know what? All of their numbers matched what they paid for their house. And I stumbled into a church that was just upset because they were going to hire a young pastor to come pastor their church. And they wanted to offer him a salary that they thought they could afford. And it was pretty much all they could afford. But then he said, well, I'm going to have to work another job. And they said, absolutely not. I'm going to be a full-time pastor. And they were offering him a salary. And the amount of money that they were going to pay him barely paid his rent. But in their minds, it covered double their mortgages because they had been in the house for 20 years. And our property values had skyrocketed in the 20 years they all bought their houses.
Give you a good comparison. I bought mine for 193. It's offered, has been offered 330 for it.
And that's, if you're not paying attention, that creeps up on people. So the numbers go up, the dollars go up, the community changes. That same church I go into, I said, guys, what? And I could look at my own eyes and I figured how much the community changed because so the work that we do, we've planted, since I've been in the Seattle area, we've planted about 70 churches, 73, I think, since I've been there 7 years. 30% of our churches are not English speaking. I know the demographics in our area. But these folks, but you go and look at it and you try to figure out which language is the most rapid growing, and it's clear in their town it's Spanish. Spanish is the fastest growing language in our state. It's about to be the 2nd largest population of our churches, besides English. Right now it's Korean, and then it's Spanish. It's about Swiss speak, Spanish speak. Our 2nd most number of churches. Well, this church has become heavily Hispanic. This town, excuse me. I knew the numbers. I had seen the restaurants with my own eyes. I saw the stores. I met the people. There's a whole street that you only speak Spanish on the street. Okay. So I just asked these folks. I said, what percentage of your town is Spanish people? And the pastor goes, it is incredible. Like in the last 20 years, it's changed so much. I'd say it's at least 10% Spanish people. I'm thinking 10%. And his church members pushed back, said, no way. Can't be that high. I said, well, the demographics say it's 70%, your school district's 80%.
And they all went,
How in the world did they not recognize that big of a shift? Because you get caught in your own world, right?
They don't go down that street.
And what we found was the longer people lived in the community, the less they were aware of what the community actually was like. But there's a point of about 7 years where if you've been in your town for 7 years, you really don't have a clear awareness of what your community is, unless you're actively, regularly trying to figure out what's it look like. And then here's the tricky thing is demographics are a great place to start, but they don't tell the whole story. Okay, let's just look at the Hispanic population. In our area, we have a pretty high percentage of our Spanish speakers who don't have documentation. They're not showing up to fill out any paperwork. So the numbers you may find may not be accurate. And so we're trying to figure out how do we plant churches when the values are changing on homes, people are moving, school districts are up and down, populations are shifting. And what do you do with the Burmese guys that don't even know there's forms to fill out because they don't even speak a lick of English, and you've got 8 families living in a house because that's the people they know, because that's the people I work with. And you're trying to figure out how do you know what your community is out? And so we started saying, look, we can use demographics, we can use our awareness of communities. I remember I was a pastor in California. I went to a house, and that's the first time I met a house that had 8 families in it. And it was really shocking to me. And then I began to realize this is a whole lot more normal than I expected. By the way, if you haven't seen it yet, this is happening in Central Texas. That's how people are. If it hasn't happened yet, it's about to happen. When the population, the cost of things explodes like it's about to happen here, that's the next step. Multiple families. And it gets to be 4 and then 5 and then 6 and then 8 to live in one house, because that's the only way people can afford to rent. So the whole family rents one room, another family rents one room, one family rents the living room. That's how it was where I was at. And I was shocked. I was shocked to find out that was the case. Well, how do you start to understand that community? Well, that's what this tries to help us do. It's a deeper dig into your community, but it's with your eyes and your ears and your relationships. And there are people out there that know the data. Now, they don't know the data. They don't have spreadsheets, but they know the people. The school teachers know which kids are showing up in their classrooms, and they see their mamas waiting for them at the end of school. The sheriff's department knows who they pick up on Friday night. There's people out there that know what's going on. The recovery folks know who's coming out of prison or who's had issues and trying to help. There are people that know the information out there. And as churches, if we connect with those individuals, we can begin to get some of the information. That's what exegesis is about. We can go down and answer most of these. All of these are questions, and I can send this to you, is to help you just kind of think, really, and engage your community, because you're going to find that most people don't necessarily know. I'm not going to go through what exegesis is. I explained that to you already.
And I've already downloaded this, so anyone who wants a copy, I can.
Excellent. So what's the difference between exegesis and engage? Because you saw both those terms up there. Basically, an exegesis is a scientific, careful analysis of your communities. As big as you want it to be. If you want to look at a town of 400 people or a neighborhood of 400 people, or you want to look at a town of 80,000 people or 1,000,000 people, you can do whatever you want. But I would recommend getting it down to a walkable area so you can know that area as best as possible. And you're trying to be as unbiased as possible when you're investigating communities. That's the tricky thing. You can't be unbiased. That pastor was sure that there was 10% of the city that was Hispanic. And it was actually, I showed him the data and he still didn't believe me. And later on he said, I just don't believe those numbers. He didn't trust the government to start with. And so he didn't trust any numbers that came from the government. And I just thought, can you walk down the street with me for a second? And we get tacos right over this break. I had a great taqueria right down the street, and I get tacos there. And I knew the guys, and I said, let's go over here, And they didn't speak much English. And he didn't want to go with me, so that's fine. We didn't go. He didn't walk down the street. That could be part of the problem up there. But here's the thing is, this is where, and I'll throw this one out there. We are constantly looking for people to come do mission work in the Northwest. If you're looking for ministry opportunities for your churches, here's one for you. The most unbiased people we have are people that come from somewhere else.
Right.
And so I got this, my brother has a bigger Texas accent than me because he's lived in Texas most of his life, or Alabama, or someone has an accent. I don't have an accent. I don't know if I do or not. People in the Northwest think I have the strongest accent they've ever heard. I don't know if you haven't traveled. But the people here, I don't know what they think. But here's the funny thing is we get people with Northwest accents to walk into our communities and they start asking questions about their communities. And they're like, who are these folks? What do they want to know? But you bring someone with a different accent, like, hey, I'm visiting y'all's town. Can you tell us a little bit about whatever? Oh, yeah, this is cute. Yeah, look, believe it or not, the accent helps in our context because it helps us get unbiased information. Because you're not out there to get something, you sound like you're not a local, and you sound like you're just asking for information. But an exegesis is where you're trying to get objective data. But at some point, you want to turn it into an engagement of the community, which is subjective. Yeah, it's kind of more like art than it is science, okay? And that's where you're starting to try to get, and this becomes to me why I started doing this, the key to what we're trying to do, okay? I'll probably stick with this somewhat. I'm gonna probably move off of it real quick. It's where your opinion starts to matter and where your experience starts to matter. As you interact with people, you see what they really mean sometimes, right? People will tell you one thing to their face. And sometimes you know what they think, sometimes you don't, but you can sometimes know what they think, right? And that's where this subjective aspect comes along. And it's based on pure observation, not data, but observation. Now you got to start with the data. It helped them to know that 70% of the population was Spanish people. Now they're thinking in a different kind of way when they're thinking about their community. But now they have to wrestle with their feelings. Because these were folks that were there before any Spanish speakers were there. In the north, up in northern part of Washington, it was all settled by Dutch farmers. And there's a phrase up there. It's called, if you ain't Dutch, you ain't much. And they mean it. I mean, I'm not really well accepted there. And all of a sudden, you got all these Spanish speakers showing up. And there's some racial tensions there. It's funny, I don't want to get into politics too much, the Northwest is a very left-leaning part of our country. Donald Trump visited Washington State one time, and he visited a little town called Linden, Washington, because that was the Dutch. If you ain't Dutch, you ain't much part of the state. It's where the KKK openly operated. It was just a few years ago. It was a very, very anti-immigrant part of the state. And so he's very welcome. I'm not saying that they're one and the same, but I'm just saying it's a different part of the culture from 70% of your town being Spanish speaking. And so they had to come to terms in a way that they have data and they have now feelings and they have observations that come with it. So I think at this point, we're probably going to move away from this somewhat. Yeah. This basically tells you why we're going to do what we're going to do. We're going to move into what we're going to do because I want to make sure we have enough time. Normally, I cover all of this in an entire, normally I do an entire process about 3 days. I'm not going to need 3 days from you guys tonight. So we go through the rationale behind it in the morning, we take a lunch, and then we actually learn how to do the process. You're going to see in your notes in just a few moments, and I'm sure you can get those downloadable for those who are watching. And then we send you out and practice it for the afternoon, and then we bring you back the next morning, and we send you out and practice it again. We have a morning where we come together and we talk through how did it go? What did you experience? Okay. And how we would do, we get a group of you guys, it's a perfect size crowd. Okay. Ideally, you want at least 8 people. Okay. Any less than that, it starts to fall apart. You can have as many as you want, but you can have 4 areas. So in exegesis, you actually start, brother, what was your name again?
Me?
Yeah.
Ronnie.
So Ronnie's right. I start with the demographic. That's what I did with this one church and all the churches I've done with. I do a demographic of a small area that we're going to focus on. And how big of an area? It depends on how big you want your churches realistically to be. To the reach is going to be, at least initially. I would say in most church contexts, even in an environment, in an urban environment, I tell our church planners, don't be thinking beyond about 20,000 people. Because if you can reach 20,000 people, praise God, you've already done a miracle. Now you can reach more than that, but at least for your initial outreach, start with an intensely focused area. Now, that said, it's not exactly based on population. It's based on what's a natural neighborhood grouping. In Seattle, some say we have 50, some say we have 80, we have numbers all in between. But Seattle is one city made up of a bunch of neighborhoods. Okay, so you have Capitol Hill, you got Ballard, you got Queen Anne Hill, whatever it is you're looking at, because people don't travel across the city to get their groceries or buy their coffee. People tend to live life in certain boundaries. And those are typically based on where you live and work, and then your third space, where you play, or your church, or your kids play baseball. That's where you live your life. And typically, people aren't going to cross barriers to do those different things. So if you find specific areas in the community where it's kind of created natural barriers, focus within those barriers. Now, what do you mean by barriers? All of you have them in your town. Now, where we live, we have mountains, we have the sound. Those are clear barriers. You're not going to cross the sound to go to church in most cases. You're not going to go across a mountain, but you're probably not going to cross a major highway. Or there may be a certain bridge that some people, that's it. People on this side don't cross that bridge. People on that side don't cross the bridge to come here. There may be one grocery store that everyone comes to, but no one goes past. You'll know in your community what are the natural boundaries. Now, some communities are very much more tight-knit and some are broad. You know, if you've got one grocery store for 20 miles, well, your community's gonna be bigger geographically. And people will think a little differently about that. But you know what the natural area that people will travel to, confine your research to that area. And then I would say this is how we do it. So you'll see the paperwork you have in front of you. Our neighborhoods range anywhere from 8,000. I think the biggest one's about 40,000, but they had to break that up in a couple just because you're just not going to have, you're not going to reach 40,000 people. You can't really stay like this. But if you send out 8 people at 3-hour intervals over a 3-day period, 4 hours at a time, you're going to cover a large area with a lot of people and you're going to find a lot of solutions. So the goal of this process, to exegete your community and engage your community, is to get data and observations that's going to help you have bridges to reach lost people. And there's lost people everywhere, even people that call themselves Christians, but certainly people who don't call themselves Christians. All right. Even some of them call themselves Christians. Did I say that out loud?
It's been said in here before.
Yeah.
So what we do is we basically want to gather information. So exegete your community. And I'm going to do this. I'm going to switch this up. This might be on here. It may not be. I don't remember if it's on the. I think it is. And the biblical rationale. That's good. Can we do that? The 4 key areas we're going to look at are social, economic, physical, and spiritual. What you're looking for are those things that people are, that help to identify who your real community is. And these are 4 areas. You could probably come up with more areas. You could add other, recreational, you could add, but these 4 areas will help define your community well. Okay? So you want to basically create teams that are gonna cover all 4 of these areas. When I say teams, if you only have 8 people, send 2 people out for social, 2 people out for physical, 2 people out for economic, and 2 for spiritual. And they're going to basically be doing survey work. Again, if you have any people that want to come do missions in the Northwest, we have surveys we've got planned for next year already for certain communities. And this is how we basically say, take these questions and ask these questions. And here's the cool thing. It's pretty relaxing. It's not very threatening to come up and ask people, because you're going to ask people. In fact, we're not even going to talk about asking people yet. You're going to observe things before you even talk with people. We want people with unbiased eyes to come and observe your city in these 4 areas, and then ask questions about these 4 areas. And the observations take place first. Then the second part, we want you to have conversations with people and ask questions. And then the third thing is to investigate what we call persons of peace. It's a missionary term where you're investigating people. When Jesus sent out the apostles in 2 by 2, and he had them go to different homes, and there's a person that you wish peace on the person. If they accept you in, you should stay with them. And then you do ministry there. But if there's no person of peace in that town, what do you say to? Dust the dust off your sandals and move on. Why? Because that's not God's appointed place for you to be working in that community, right? That's how I take that, at least in part. There's other things we talk about those people, but we won't talk about those. So there's 3 parts to it. That's why I could go over 3 days, because it gives you time to process what you've observed. And so what we would do is we'd start off our process by having the first, we would have these 4 teams and say, okay, you're going to be on the social team, you're going to be on the social team. Actually, it works better if you don't have spouses together, and the reasons why, because
They talk to each other too much.
Could be. So we might send you 2 on the economic team. We might send you 2 on the, anyway, we group people up. So 2 go for the economic, 2 go for social, 2 go for the religious, spiritual, religious, and 2 go for the physical. And the first day you go out, you're just making these observations and you're writing down everything you can observe. So for example, under social, you would read through there. So you guys are the social. I can't remember how I said the social. You go and just simply say, what is the interaction between the different generations? Now, where are you going to do this? We tell people just go where the people are and just watch them. And don't be a weird, creepy, watchy person, right? It gets you in trouble, Don't go to the schoolyard and watch the little kids. But really, just go where people are and watch them. Get a coffee. That's what I'm telling you. Get a coffee, sit down, The malls are great locations for it, or outdoor kind of town centers. They have that everywhere now. Or go to the grocery store. It's a great place. Everyone goes to the grocery store. Or go to the parks. Go to the business places, just watch people come and go and see how do the different people of different generations interact with each other. That tells you a lot about a community. If you're working in our area, our community is very heavy Asian. The way that younger people treat older folks is very different than where the Anglo communities, younger people treat their. Sometimes I wish I was more Asian than that, because I'm more respected. But my teenagers, that's another story there.
Well, grandchildren are a reward.
They'll bring it
Let
back.
your teenagers live.
Okay. I have hope one day. What's the diversity of the community, and is it interactive or isolated? What does that mean? Well, obviously, what's the diversity of the community? And how can you tell the diversity of a community just by observing? At this point, you're not asking any questions. You're just sending teams out to observe your community. How can they tell if there's diversity in the community?
The people,
In what way?
the diversity of the people.
Okay.
Race, the creed, color, and how they interact with each other.
And what else?
Different shopping centers.
What type of shopping? If you go to my town, what type of restaurants are available? And once they type of restaurants, go look at where there's a Mexican restaurant, and then look where there's a Mexican restaurant. And y'all know the difference, right? You come to my town and you drive down Pacific Avenue, and you're going to see the largest Asian grocery store in our region is in my town. An H Mart, it's the size of a super Walmart, dedicated solely for goods imported from Hong Kong and China and Japan and Korea. All right. Omar. My Korean friends would always joke with me, what's called H Mart? No, this Kmart was taken. Korean.
stands for Oriental Mart.
I'm not sure what H stands for, but that's what H Mart is. But there's also Hong Kong Market just down the street, and then there's another. We have 3 major Asian background grocery stores. Of course, across the street is El Campeon, which is the largest Spanish background grocery store. It's across the street from H Mart in our community. And you go down the street, and we have a Cambodian restaurant, and we have tons of Korean restaurants. My town's about a third Korean. So you have all of these Korean restaurants and Korean all-you-can-eat barbecues, and then tucked in between them are boba shops, like girls love boba tea. And then you also have Mongolian grills. You know, that gives you some indication. What are some other ways you can tell the diversity of the community?
All we have is casinos.
Casinos. No, that's a real thing.
It is.
Where I live, when you drive, you see either, and I'm not trying to be stereotypical, it's a part of the reality. There's 3 ways you can tell whether there's a reservation nearby. If there's a casino, a smoke shop, or a hospital. Or the elders lodges, something we have, the tribal community center. It's a reality. It helps you understand what your community is like. You know, of course, you see signs in that language that helps too. That's another key. Signs in a language. If I'm advertising in Spanish, I assume that there are what?
Spanish.
If I'm advertising in Chinese,
Chinese.
when I live in San Francisco, there are streets in San Francisco. They don't even have English signs, they're all in Chinese. Because that entire part of Chinatown is Chinese speaking, right? Those are ways that you can tell the diversity. Now, what's it mean to say it's interactive versus isolated?
Do they interact with each other as a group or?
And beyond that even.
Well, a lot of times, if there's not even English on the signs, you're not gonna have Anglos there. I mean,
That's a good point. So when I walk into H Mart, I'd say usually about half of the population is non-Asian. The Russians like to shop there. We like to shop there. People that go to shop. There's a Korean butcher shop across the street from H Mart. I've walked in there a few times just to see, there's never non-Koreans in that shop. I've never seen a Chinese background person in that shop. It's always Korean. In fact, it's in the strip mall, that every store in that strip mall is Korean owned. And if you go there, you'll be the only non-Korean there. That's isolated. That one community is staying in that community versus the H Mart meant for everybody, even though it's focused on one.
Yesterday I went to a restaurant in Park Dallas. It's very Hispanic. When I walked in, everybody stopped and looked at me. They stopped. Well, my boss's name is Josue. When Josue walked in, yeah. Okay. Now I went back to the there. What's this guy? Oh, he's Hispanic. Josue. Okay. So,
Now, you're just at the point of observing, but why would you suppose it be important to recognize if a community is interactive or isolated?
Because it's gonna dictate how you react to that community if they're interactive and if they're not interactive.
Or it might dictate something else too. What else could you think through that would mean?
It may dictate also why you weren't accepted on the reservation, but he.
That's right. So you may not be the suited party to reach that community, but you may know the person who does. So these are just observations. And you bring a team in that doesn't live in a place, they can help you walk through all this. You know, because the truth of the matter is, no matter how much, I mean, I guarantee you, if you look through this whole thing, and we did the 3-day long process, I've had pastors go back to me, I went and did what you did. I never knew about my community, X, Y, or Z. You know, we started doing cowboy churches. People kind of thought it was a joke. And it's cowboy churches in Seattle. And then I pulled out a statistic and I said, there's more arenas in Metro Seattle than any other urban center in the United States of America, including any in Texas. By far, more arenas, Metro Seattle.
Wow.
Now that blew me away. And I told our guys that, and they're like, huh? They're like, are you kidding me? But there's a lot of reasons for that. And you think of cowboys, and I'm thinking of Calgary, I'm thinking of Pecos, I'm thinking of, you know, guys in their chats, and it's just looking really rugged. A lot of these guys work for Microsoft, and they have lots of money, because what do you have to have horses? And they work for Microsoft on Monday through Friday, and they're riding horses Saturday and Sunday. Okay, and we have rodeos. Every town in that area up there has a rodeo in the summer. Every Saturday you go to a different rodeo. Okay, it's not what people expected, but when you start looking at the observations, you point out, like, oh, okay, that makes sense. You start thinking about it. You just look through this list. How are people connected to each other, the community, the state, the world? And what you would do is you would have one team of people look through each of these lists. So that's the social. Then you have the economic, and then the physical, and then the spiritual. Okay. And so you would have a different group of people go through each of those lists and then go out and gather that information. Now, I said you need at least 8 people. To be honest with you, you need really at least 16 to do a good job. Because you don't need one team doing one area. Because what's gonna happen is you're gonna go out and the first, however much time you set aside for this, we can get teams commit one day to this, so we end up sending them out for a few hours for observation, a few hours for the conversations at the end, and then the implementation, we kind of fudge at the end and figure out how to make that work. Sometimes we do a second day with that. Ideally, if we can get them for 3 days, that's when we can do all of them fully. But what happens is someone's gonna get distracted in the conversation. You're gonna be a talker. You gotta figure out how to extricate yourself from that situation, but it's just hard. You gotta talk. I'm a talker. Tom's a talker. Our mother's the queen of talkers. Sometimes you don't know how to get out of it. I was at a meeting, I won't tell you about that, 'cause I'm a talker, so I can't go there. But what you do is you send 2 teams that can gather more information. And then you also then can cross the information to see if it's the same. Because how you're gonna observe something, maybe a little different how you observe it. Maybe a little bit different how you observe it or how I observe it. So the more people you get talking through something, the more you start getting a better and bigger picture. It's not that one's right or wrong, but you just have a fuller picture. It's like the 4 Gospels. Why do we have 4 Gospels? They don't tell a different story, they tell different versions of the story. Like cops like to interview as many people possible on a crime scene. Of the car accident, they want as many people possible can tell us what happened, as you get a better picture. And the same with more people that you can do this. We could just look through all of it if you wanted to, but I think for the sake of our time, we won't necessarily do that. But I want to look through some of it so you have a sense of what it's like. So the social, what you do is you go through here and you just read through all these categories and you just have them write down the information they have. So I just send people out. Come on, Mr. Dragons. It's going to look real scientific, but I send teams out with notepads that look something like this. And just say, guys, I want you to write down, take these questions and write down as many as you can, as information you can. And then I put a thing at the end and say, and what else did you notice that you think we want pointing out? And I tell you what, especially if you give it, for some reason, young ladies will just fill this thing up. Okay. You give this to a group of people and let them just go and say, tell me about my community. And I act dumb. I don't know anything about it. You tell me what I need to know about my community. And they fill it out. And then they come back and then we talk about it. And what's interesting is this is where if you're bringing a team of people together to do this, get them together, you send them out to do their observations and then bring them back. Have a meal, sit down, relax and say, okay, folks doing the social, what did you observe? All right, and that's interesting. Folks with economic, what did you observe? And then each of the categories. And then you have the other folks say, what did you hear them say? So the folks came back and said, oh, we did an analysis. We tried to understand what the interactions with different generations were, and this is what we found. And someone said, oh, well, did you notice this? And what will happen is you're going to spur thoughts. Well, I didn't ask the question why that was that way or how that worked out that way. But you're going to prepare them for the conversation that's going to happen in the next round. That makes sense?
Mhm.
Any thoughts so far? I'm just talking real fast. Too much information, and when I'm honest with you, my apologies for that.
Brainstorming.
It's a brainstorming session, yeah. But what are some questions or thoughts you guys have so far before I move forward? There's none. No
Well, I
pressing.
was curious about Pennsylvania and South Jersey. My wife and I are high school sweethearts from Alabama.
Well, that's where the guy that originated this was from, and
Okay.
they found it to be an effective tool where they're at. So, as you're looking through these questions, these are all applicable wherever you find yourself. You know, what are the major people and organizations in business, manufacturing, schools, colleges, universities? You're wanting to know what's the observable institutions in any location. And we've had some amazing opportunities come out of some of these observations. Once you bring the folks in and they've all written down what they've observed, they've had a chance to talk with each other. Really good if you get people who've gone out to observe the same general area. If you've had 2 groups look at social, bring them together, they talk it through, like, oh, I didn't see that, or I didn't see that. Oh, okay. Now they've looked at a different lens. You come together, we always come together and pray. And we tell people when they first meet, if after the first session, if in any of the second sessions you have an opportunity to talk with someone about the gospel, please don't not do that. It's not the goal of this, but if you have an opportunity to give a chance to share the gospel, please go ahead and do that. But the goal of the second part is now to engage in conversations. Now you can be careful. You have to be careful because a conversation can last 3 hours by itself. You get the right lady or you get the right man that just wants to talk. He's had a down day. He needs to have a relationship with somebody. He'll talk with them. But we basically tell people this: just go have conversations and use what you've already observed. Now, you don't come up here and say, I've been watching your city for the last 3 hours. I want to talk to you about it. They're going to think you're weird, you know, and you probably are if you say it that way. But basically, look at the hints there. So in the section under Coach Social, talk to the major gatekeepers or power brokers. Oh, by the way, I skipped the major step. Visit, the last one under the observations, visit social organizations such as school, police, hospitals, fire departments, businesses, such as realtors, and others who have community data and up-to-date information. So go visit the important players in the community. If I was to say that for your towns, who would that be? Who would be the important institutions in your town?
Chief of police.
Chief of police, fire department,
Real estate, rental agents.
real estate agents are great. Or hood,
City clerk.
city clerk.
A lot of different pastors and churches.
Especially those doing the religious one, that'll be valuable if they're willing to talk with you. Some are and some aren't. And some of them are, but they're not going to give you the answers that you need.
Even when I went to pastor an existing church, the first thing I did, it wasn't really a town, it was more of a community. They had a volunteer fire department, they had a water company, and a community center, and the community center used to be a school. So if you didn't used to go to the school, you're an outsider.
Yeah, makes sense.
Even if you lived there for 20 years. If you didn't go to that school, you weren't. Yeah, closed in 1972 when I was born.
So you're an outsider.
I was an
Because you didn't go there.
outsider.
You were born there. Well, here are things we found to be useful places that you may raise an eyebrow to, maybe you're not, I don't know. Bars, tattoo parlors, parks and rec centers, libraries. And I say those specifically because these are not places you think of here. A tattoo doesn't take 2 seconds to put on. And people that show up to get tattoos show up with a story in most cases. Maybe a dumb story, but maybe a very moving story. And so tattoo artists hear a lot about your community.
All right, you're my man. I'm just used to the wife tonight.
I'm not saying get a tattoo, I'm not saying don't, but I'm just saying, if your team, and some people maybe were, leery about that. Now, we don't have restaurants that don't have a bar in it, so I don't know how that's viewed in Texas, but we have folks go to a restaurant or a bar, and let the people know, hey, I'm just visiting, I'm doing this. This was my approach when I would do it. I said, hey, I'm here on behalf of so-and-so, he's a new pastor in town, he's wanting to figure out how his church can make a difference in the community. You might ask you some questions. You know how many answers I got? How many times I got told no? Almost never. Even in very secular, non-church Northwest, most people are like, well, someone wants to know how they can help us. Okay, I'll answer your questions. And actually, I went into a tattoo parlor once because then we recommended people. So I'm gonna go. I'm telling people to do it. And they were the most friendly people.
Oh, yeah.
They were very happy to help. And the people getting tattoos were happy to help. They gave us answers. Haircut salons. Everyone goes and gets their haircut. All right. Well, not everyone. We won't comment on that one.
Since you said that, you made me think. Last year, we had a gentleman that was Vietnamese that was in the class, and he was a lay leader, had no desire to plant a church or be a pastor, but he wanted to be a good pastor's assistant, basically. And he told us that if it is Korean run, it's hair. If it's nails, it's Vietnamese. In clean. And he and his wife owned a nail shop in the mall and then another one on the side. But he just straight up said, if they're doing nails, they're Vietnamese.
And here's another, I don't know if this made it to Texas or not, but if you're on the West Coast, if it's donuts, it's Cambodia. It's the reality. In fact, there's a show called The Donut King on
That's an
Netflix.
awesome show.
Go watch it.
90% of the donuts in California are owned by.
You'll understand why it's Cambodia. Yeah, it's crazy, so. But, yeah, so these are just some ideas of things to work through on that and go talk to these folks. And here's the one thing I'll throw out there.
I didn't do it.
All of us found a different person of peace. Some people, someone said fire chief. One guy found a ton of overwhelming data where the fire chief was able to connect. And not only that, so there's 2 levels of people you're looking for in these conversations. You look for people that are going to open doors for you. That's the gatekeeper. And you're looking for the person that's going to walk you through the door. And that person's harder to find. If you find the people that open doors for your church or your church plant or your pastor or whoever you're doing this for, if you can find those open doors, that's critical because they'll do the work and they'll find it for you. If you can find the person that's going to escort you through the door, it changes the whole ballgame. And that community is a little town called Darrington. We were trying to get this church off the ground. It died basically. Had down to 6 people and it was dead. pastor left, and no pastor, like, can you help us? We did this. We said, we'll do this. We'll figure out where we can go from here, right? And it was the fire chief in that town. And long story made short, we were able to bring in a new pastor, and the pastor, the first year he was on the job, was the grand marshal of the 4th of July parade. It was run by the fire chief in that town. And one of the things the fire chief said, if you want to come to this town, we do 4th of July big in this town. And if you want to be part of this town, you do 4th of July with us. We took that as an important thing. Now, I would have never known that going through this town. No one, there's nowhere in the church that says do 4th of July big, right? It doesn't say that. But the fire chief knew that and knew the parade was important. And so the pastor was willing to learn. He said, well, how do I do that? He said, well, you walk around on 4th of July, the first year you do that. He wasn't the marshal the first year, actually, the second year. Because the first year, everyone sits out and they wave at all the people going by and they shake hands and they give gifts. And it's a big deal in this particular town. He says, you need to be doing that, or better yet, you walk along and you give gifts to the people sitting on their porches waiting and giving gifts. And he did that. And he just started walking with the people and they said, well, who are you? Because who said it? It's the same as the town you're talking about. Everyone knew everyone. It's a town of about 800 people. And everyone knew everyone. And they knew why the old pastor left. They knew everything about that old dead church. You think, who wants to go there, right? And this guy was just going up and down the street, walking in the 4th of July parade and telling everybody, I'm the new pastor here. I just want to get to know your town. And 2 separate people told him the old pastor so-and-so never went down the street at 4th of July parade. And his first Sunday after the 4th of July parade, he had like 20-some people in church.
That's really
Yeah. Now, I would have never imagined that 4th of July parade being that big a deal, that important. But in that community, it was. And the fire chief, then when he realized what was happening, he was a believer. I think he had been a member of that church when he was a kid, but they joked, they said there's only 3 churches in town. Everyone's been a member of all of them, but I don't know if that's true or not. He realized what the pastor was doing. About halfway through the parade, he was on the truck. He got off the truck and walked with the pastor the rest of the parade, therefore giving his blessing on the pastor. My context where I was doing is a bigger town. And my personal piece that I found, she was the head of the international student community at a local community college. And I just went in there because that's what my wife does. She teaches ESL, international students. And so I thought, well, let me just go see what the opportunities are here. And I walked in, the campus was kind of dead. The day was not like going on. And I went to the office. I went to the secretary's office and I said, hey, same thing I just told you guys, I'm here with so-and-so pastor. He's just trying to figure out how I can make an impact in the community. And she said, there's not really anything you can do here. We don't separate church and state. And I said, no, we're just here to help. What can we do to help? She said, I don't know. Well, let me get you my name. And before she would get her name out, the lady comes in, she said, can I help you? And I thought, oh, she's gonna keep me out of here because the other lady was real cool for me, right? So I started telling her what we're doing, and the next thing I know, she would come back and sit with me, and she started going through a list of things that churches could do to help. These students, so we have 180 students at this school. They come from other countries. And they will move here, they will stay in our program for 2 years, and almost all of them will never be in the whole of America. And they'll go back to their countries. Almost all of them. You ever heard of President Xi, actually Premier Xi? He's the ruler of China right now. You ever heard of this guy? He's more of a dictator now in China than Mao Zedong was. The guy that runs the country. He went to high school in Tacoma for a year. He was a foreign exchange student.
I'll just spell the last one.
Xi, Xi.
He's all over the news.
Yeah. He never went to anybody's home while he was there. We have people in this country. That's what this lady says. These students will never be in the home of anybody. They're from Saudi Arabia, they're from Morocco, they're from Turkmenistan, they're from Uganda, they're from Venezuela, they're from China, they're from Japan, they're from all over the world. And she said, is there any ways that some of the church members, we need English partners just to practice with them for an hour? And she goes, and if they would let them just come afterwards, just take them to their house and wash their clothes once a semester, or invite them home for Thanksgiving dinner, or just Friday night pizza, anything like that. One time, these kids will talk about that for the rest of their lives. She said, do you think your church members will let international students just come stay in their house for a Sunday afternoon? She goes, they can even take them to church. Take them to church and let them know about religion. They need to hear about American religion too. So I'm sitting in the office with this lady at this public university saying, take my international students to church, you know? And so as we began to talk more and more and more, she said, and listen, we have a shortage of bus drivers. And we want to take these students to them. And she just tons of ideas. Well, I wrote all these ideas down, went to the church. They liked some of the ideas. They came back and they built relationships. I would never imagine the international ESL director at a community college would have been that important. But in that context, it became important. We found people, there was a halfway house with people coming out of prison. It literally became a connecting point for one of our pastors. For some, it's the police chief. For some of them, it was, I think of it all. One of them was a laundromat. So people went into a laundromat, like a coin-operated washateria, and the owner happened to be there, and that became a person of peace in that community. She was a Korean lady that ran this place, and it was a majority Hispanic area, but she knew everybody, and she learned Spanish as well as English, and so she knew everybody up and down the streets, because guess who washes their clothes? Well, apparently everybody washes their clothes at some point, and if you don't have a washing machine at your house, you go to that washateria all the time. So that became a person of peace in that situation. So you're looking for these kind of things, and we call those people the gatekeepers or the persons of peace. So you're looking for it and trying to talk to them. Now, you don't know who that is until you start these conversations. But here's the amazing thing. Every one of our pairs of people found one. Over the course of doing this, every single one of our couples found one. If we did it at least for 2 days, every one of our couples found somebody. Now, some of them are bigger persons of peace or gatekeepers than others, but everyone found somebody. Now, we all found people that weren't interested in talking, or found people that gave the answers and moved on. We all found that. But you'll get 3 hours if you find that one person. And if we had 16 people after doing it in 8 groups, and you find 8 people that can have that sort of an impact in the community, and you hand that off to a pastor, or you hand that off to a missions leader, or you yourself take responsibility for it, and you have 8 open doors in your community. How many churches have even a single open door in a community like that of non-church members that are somewhat friendly toward your church and when you're a mission in your community? And we found tons of open doors doing it that way. Does that make sense? Any questions about that so far? Not a single couple, not a single grouping of people went out and didn't find someone. Now, some people found people that want to argue, it's like that. That's going to happen. We have one guy, when he found out this was a sign, he was from Southeast Texas. He came up there and helped us with this project from Seabrook, Texas. I don't know if you heard of that town, outside of Houston. And he came up there and did it. And he said, he didn't know what he was coming for. He just said, my pastor's bringing me on a mission trip. So I came up, what are we going to do? And I told him what it was. He goes, oh, you know what his job was? He registered people to vote. Because I can go to people's doors and ask them questions. And he's an older gentleman. So he had a hard time just going out and doing stuff. He thought he'd be driving, so that's not all walking. So he ended up finding a bookstore, coffee shop, hybrid. And he just sat there taking a break. He'd been out for about an hour. He was pretty tired, so he sat there and he realized this coffee shop in that town was the hub of the town. And he said, how many people come in every day? She's like, pretty much the whole town in the course of a week will come in my shop. And he met the mayor, and he met the police chief in that town, and he met the lawyer, district attorney guy, whatever in the town. And he just ended up staying in the coffee shop the entire 2 days, and he met tons of people.
That's age right there. That's wisdom.
That's wisdom.
We walk the streets and we some coffee.
So here's where it gets, here's what you actually do. You ask people questions about their community and interact with it, okay? You simply ask questions. Who lives in this community and neighborhood? Now, don't do it like I said in a creepy way, but people love to talk about their community. Tell me about this town. This is a neat town. I like this coffee shop. Oh, this is a beautiful street. Why is that building there and not here? And you start asking people, they're going to end up just divulging information to you because everyone likes to talk about themselves. Okay? So you ask people who lives in the community. You know, when I was on that Hispanic street, that Spanish street with all the restaurants on it, I just went into one of the taquerias and I started asking questions. And I asked the guys, hey, you know, I noticed a lot of taquerias here. Are these been there a long time? And they just were happy to talk about it. They're glad to know someone wanted to know about their taquerias. Are there people of an ethnic background in the community? You be careful how you ask that question. You do, but you can ask it, you know, hey, I noticed there's a lot of Korean stores, or why are there so many Korean stores in this community? And your community is going to be different, right? How does it work in your community? You figure that out. Where do people from here live? Now that's when you start finding out the isolated versus the open communities. Because in our area, in that area where the Dutch, if you ain't Dutch, you ain't much, you'll see all the Mexican restaurants, but you don't see communities where Mexican people live. Or I say Mexican, Spanish speaking. Most of them are Mexican in that community. But you don't see where people live. Because they typically live on the farms of the farmers, and he has lots available for small abodes in them where people can live. So they don't live out in the open where you can see them, but they're there. So you just got to figure that out sometimes.
And the Dutch like Mexican food. Right?
What's that?
And the Dutch like Mexican food.
Yeah, they like Dutch food. I don't know what Dutch food is. And then here's the thing, listen to what's being said to clerks, waiters, and general conversation in the community. Sometimes the best form of conversation is when you just don't say much and you just listen. This is what's being said between the people as you're drinking your coffee at the coffee book shop, right? You're just observing conversations as much as engaging in them. Try to determine what significant lifestyle and mindset features you find in them, what significant cultures, institutions, and emphases is part of their lives. Is there any new construction in the community? How do they view things beginning in their area? One of the things we found in one of the towns we did this in, why do you live? What do you like about your town? It's a great question, by the way. What do you like about your town? Let me tell you all about it. I live in a town called Federal Way. It's on the border of a town called Tacoma. And those two towns also separate King County from Pierce County. And when you go to Tacoma and ask questions, it's one thing. If you go to the Federal Way, you ask questions. If you live on the border on the Tacoma side in Pierce County, and you ask them, what do you like about Tacoma? A very common response is, our taxes are lower. That's why they live on that side of the street. Because Pierce County taxes are lower than King County taxes. Now, you're not going to hear that question anywhere else, but on that, there's about a 4-block radius. That's why they chose to live on that side of that dividing line. And so what does that tell you about those folks? They don't want to pay much taxes. Yeah, saving some money. Huh?
Lower economic.
Believe it or not, it's the opposite.
Oh,
That side of the town is much wealthier than this side of the town.
Because they're smarter.
they're smarter.
They want to
Their
do more.
money.
They want to do
They don't
more.
want to spend money, they don't have to spend.
People
Believe it or
like that
not,
want to
that-
protect their money.
And they're not really pro-government. That's something else, just by the reaction you get. So it's not just what they're saying, well, we don't pay much taxes, you know? People talk that way, they don't want to pay taxes. I mean, nobody wants to pay taxes.
Probably, the houses there are, the ones on the other side can't afford, that may be. If wealthier people live there, it tends to be a higher.
It does push the property values, and the schools are better on that side, by the way, which is weird because the taxes are lower. But the schools are better because wealthier people live there. So there's all these dynamics you start putting together.
It's counterintuitive.
It is.
But you wouldn't know that if you didn't go and observe that, you know? And an interesting thing, because of where they've chosen to live, the city doesn't want to reward them. So the kids take about an hour to get to school every day. They have to take a bus all the way around Harvard to get to where they go to school. A lot of dynamics going on that you learn by observation. But that's the social one. I'll probably talk longer than you guys can engage. Let's take a break for a few minutes. Come back, and I just want to briefly walk through the other three and then talk about what we do with the information about it, okay? Is that okay to take a break now?
We usually about 7:30.
Okay, let's take about a 5 or 10 minute break, something like that. And then come back, and I'm gonna walk through the other three areas, and then what do you do with the data when you get done with this? Information coming in this, so, but this is something you take back and begin thinking through how you can implement it in your own context. I skipped over this, but basically you're looking for three things. You're looking for what do you see, observation, that's the first layer. And then once you do that, you come back as a group, and then you go back out and do the conversation. What do you hear? I stress, what do you hear more than what you say? Try to listen as much as you can. And then the last one is what needs to be done in implementation, what are your hands going to be involved? We look at the eyes, ears, and hands as a way of doing that. Before we go into the next three categories, I want to go here and see what are the challenges to doing this. I kind of saved this because hopefully you're at least interested, you know, why could we do this in our community? Even if, and I do this by myself a lot. I go, especially when I'm not in my town. My town, I know I'm biased, but when I'm out looking for new spots to do church planting, because that's my job, or I'm out with a church planter, I'm just doing this intuitively now. I've been doing this for a few years now. And so I make it my goal. I make it a priority. And so what's the obstacle from being able to do this is not making it a priority, because we all drive the same way most of the time. If you have a job, you typically drive the same route to that job, unless you get Google and you find a faster route because of an accident. That's usually the only reason you get off. And I've made it a goal to drive different ways to all the places I go. And I have a lot of places I have to be. But I make it a goal to get off the main highway sometimes. And sometimes it's nice for me because I don't like all the traffic. Sometimes it's way out of my way. I do it on purpose so I can see something I haven't seen before. That's how I become aware of things I didn't see previously. Stuff that's really good to know and some that's sad to know. I was telling Tom, a group of pastors that came up to see us a few weeks ago, one of my drives, I just stumbled across, there was a crowd of people just there doing drugs on the side of the street. I saw a young man, he probably wasn't, he might have been 20 years old, I don't know how, just sitting there shooting up heroin on his arm right there on the sidewalk. If I had not driven that way that day, I wouldn't have seen that with my own eyes. I know the news, I hear what's going on in my community, but I saw it with my own eyes, and that impacts me in a different way. Or I drive through another area and I see, oh, wow, this area that looked bad now has been redone. It's gentrified, you know? I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't driven that way. The opposite is true. I drive through an area, I'm like, oh my gosh, this has gotten really bad. So just get out there with your eyes and observe, and then make a point to stop in certain communities. Just go talk to people. So do all of these things on your own when you can, if you want to reach a community. Just get to know the community. I have a friend of mine that does, he started a church in Washington, D.C. He didn't even try to start a church for the first 3 years. Because in the area we decided to plant, everyone wanted to see if he was going to stick around. Because people show up and then they leave. They account you out when you show up, and he didn't even try. He just built relationships for 3 years. So he found the persons of peace. He asked the right questions. He observed the right things, and slowly built trust in his community. And even then, it took him 10 years to plant a church. He didn't even try for the first 3. And I don't have the stick-to-itiveness enough to have been there doing that. You know, I guess why God didn't call me to do that. But he knew he had to earn the trust. He had to learn his community. And so I would say, just make it a priority to get out and keep learning your community. Another challenge is thinking you already know all you need to know. Going back to the pastor school, we got to be at least 10% Spanish. He's way off base, but we all are way off base in ways you can't imagine. Having lived in California and then living in Seattle, something that I saw happen crazy where I live, that I think you're about to experience. I think you've had your private housing values have gone up a lot in the last year. I hope I'm wrong, but I'm here to tell you, hold on to your hats. Mm-hmm. You're at the beginning, the very beginning about what's going to happen. Doubling of your housing prices in the next 5 years is probably. I saw that happen multiple times in the places I live. Whatever your house is right now, it's going to double in the next 5 years. I think that's probably accurate. Okay. Well, it can't possibly happen. I moved into a community in 1993. The house was $400,000 to live there. I thought, who in the world could pay $400,000 for a house? By 2013, it was $3 million was the average price for a house in that community. Who in the world could afford $3 million? They have doubled since then. An average home in that community is between $5 and $6 million.
Since I got that offer for 330, it's down to 550.
It's going to be crazy, you know. And you think, well, I know my community. I know my community is changing all the time. It always is. There's new people coming in. My wife, I told you, she works with students from different backgrounds and international communities. Just in the last week, 7 Afghan students have joined her class, her program, because we have a lot of Afghans that are en route to end up in our United States, you know, and they're landing right where we live, you know. My wife has worked with Sudanese, Somali, Syrian, Iraqi, Congolese, Japanese, Chinese students from all walks of life, Saudi, Moroccan.
Perspectives of the world Christian.
There are people that are heading this direction. The community is constantly changing. Your community may be the one where people come and they spend lots of money and drag your prices up, or they may be the refugees that have to flee those communities, and you have now a lot more people living in your community that can't afford to live in other places, and it's going to affect your community in different ways. Don't think the community is not changing. It's changing rapidly, and probably more rapidly than most of us are aware. So constantly be learning about it, okay? The next thing is take time to pray before you exegete. It goes from Luke 10:2 principle. Just pray that God can reveal things to you, because there's some people that don't want to talk. You go out and try to do this work, they're going to be suspicious of you. They're not going to want to cooperate with you. But I believe in the power of prayer. Pray before you go. Just go talk to people. Talk to the Lord before you talk to people. Make it His work. See where God's at work. And we have found in a lot of our communities, we try to do some of these things, and we didn't find the information in some that we did in others. We took that partly as God's sign to work in this community. And we found it easier to plant churches there. Make sure you don't do exegeting alone, bring others with you. I said, I go do this when I'm not by myself. It makes a world of difference if you do it with somebody else. One of my pastor friends, one of my best friends, I just saw him last week. And he went with me on the one that we went and just talked with people. And it's fun to be with him, some of my good friends, but we also he sees things that I don't see. Or I'll say something like, I didn't see that. I'll say, yeah, I didn't see that. And he reaffirms it. We'll talk about it. We'll go back and observe it again. So sometimes the second pair of eyes sees things differently. they need to see. And the last thing I'll suggest is communicate effectively and timely with what you discover. And that's where we're going to get to what we're going to do next. It's great to go out and check out your community and get to know it. And if you do nothing with it, a lot of energy spent for not much. So what we do, what I'm going to talk about now is what do you do to capture this information? Finding out that walking on the 4th of July would have been a fun thing to sit around and laugh about, but because we were able to hand that off to the pastor that came, it wasn't there when we did the meetings, by the way. He was coming, but he wasn't in the meetings when we all went out to the town with this information. But because we got that to him, he made it a priority and it made a difference in his church. His church runs about 50 now, and they started another church. So he had a really good start, and it's carried on. Now it's been 3.5 years. Because we did something with information. So I'm going to tell you how I do it. I can even give you an example. I didn't think to do that, of what I do. So I take it upon myself, when we have teams come and do this, I'm the compiler of all the information. So we send teams out and we have them do the observation part. They take these notebooks and they write them down, as much information as they can. And then we have them ask the questions. We're going to look at all the questions for all three provided our time here. And then we write those down. And we all sit together and we write down. So let's say we have Tom and Carl, they go out and they do economic, and you guys do one, you do another, and then we get 10 groups to go out and they cover several of these areas. You're going to come back, we're going to try to group the findings together, but what if we start finding something consistent? And one of the things I think about, I think I mentioned there was a halfway house that someone had ended up connecting with. And what was interesting is this particular town wasn't near a prison, but that halfway house became a huge bridge to prison ministry. Because even though the town wasn't near a prison, a lot of people from the prison ended up in the town. And so because they're the halfway house. And so the police department ended up referencing the halfway house. The grocery store referenced the halfway house because they would actually hire ex-cons as part of their mission. And so people in different walks of life kept referencing the same facility. And it just so happened that the person that went to the facility found that to be a person of peace. So what would you do with that information if everyone found a similar thread in their very different stories?
Well, that becomes your jewel there, right?
It became something to pay attention to.
Well, and if you've got people like what Ronnie wants to do, he's already, and also Sylvester is a part of. What is yours called, Sylvester?
Overcomer.
So they're both programs that help people who are coming out of addictions. And so if the church is offering that and you partner with a halfway house, people coming out have a place to be in a group.
But the pastor that showed up there had no experience whatsoever with anything with prison ministry, with addiction ministry, getting people back, had zero experience with it. But he took this as a sign, well, maybe I should get some experience with it. So he talked with his church members and found out one lady had a son who had gone to penitentiary for a while. And as a result, she got connected with Set Free. I don't know if you guys know who they are. It's a ministry out of California. It helps people mostly with substance abuse background, but it can be kind of a lot of different things. But the other is Set Free. You're set free from it through Christ. And so because of that, he ended up getting Set Free connected with them. They ended up in the long while, the church itself ended up buying property and having housing for folks and work with these organizations. This became a part of their ministry because of an exercise that was done, because they allowed the Holy Spirit to work through all these pieces. And nobody, the pastor at the church, even thought this was the thing. But it just kept popping up in everyone's analysis. Like, it wasn't like, this is what God told us to do. It was like, that seems to be something. Let's explore that. And as they explored it, it was something. So those are some things to put together. So capturing the data becomes important and doing something with it, finding out something and communicating it. And so what we do is we would take these sessions and if this was the proper, like I would introduce you guys to it, I would have sent you guys out for a couple of hours at least to do the observation. You come back and we talk about it. And while we're talking about, I'm asking a scribe to do this, and I'm also doing it. We're writing down what we're hearing. Now the scribe's writing down everything they're hearing. And I was writing down the important things that I thought were worth noting. And then we compare it and say, okay, did you hear this? Yeah, I heard that too. And so at the end of the day, we just asked them to leave their notebooks with us. So we have all the notebooks. I read through them, or I signed a person to do it. I usually did it myself because I just wanted the information. I'm a bit of a nerd. And then we have what we wrote down in our discussion times. We had a discussion time after the observation section. We had a discussion time after the conversation. section. And then sometimes, back to the southern. Sometimes we don't often have time to do all of them. We don't have 3 separate times to send people out. Ideally, it's great if you can. But I just tell people in the second one, try to pull this one into this one. At the end of the conversation, try to look what can, and that's what I would simply say. After you're talking with somebody at the end, I would say, well, what could a pastor do to make a difference? Or what could a church do? Or what could someone who wants to make a difference do? I'm telling you, I heard all kinds of examples. One that I thought was really interesting, at one place we went to, I went to a park and rec, because that's the place I recommend going. So I'd never been to one. I thought I'd go to that one this time. Because there's endless places you can go, by the way. We went to ferry terminal. We've gone to the 4th Street department. I mean, there's this endless tribal reservation area. I mean, there's so many things you could do. We go to all these places to figure out where's the best places to go. I went to the Parks and Rec one time. It literally, well, I'll tell you about that in a minute. So I go and said, hey, we're from so-and-so church. He said, okay, what can I do for you? I said, no, what can we do for you? Churches want to make an impact in the community. She said, well, we have everything we need. Like, you want to buy stuff? I said, no. The best thing we have, we don't have much money. I said, and that's the other thing is I often pretend like I was from the church. I really was. I was representing the church. That's how I usually said. I said, the church doesn't have a lot of money. I said, but they have people. Well, we need those. We need those desperately. I said, well, how could you use people? She said, well, we have what we call pop-ups, pop-up camps or day camps. We take, she goes, and by the way, remember I said, what do you use during the conversation? Your ears. This was very insightful for me to hear this. She said, we used to have activities at the Park and Rec Center, which is I went inside, it's a beautiful facility. They have basketball, they have a nice carpeted area that's a gym floor area, they got a climbing wall, they have places. We used to every summer have this place packed with kids, and we noticed something a few years ago, people don't want to come here. We get a few kids to come here. We built this gorgeous facility and they just don't want to come. And we go ask them why, and they're playing video games or something. The kids are playing video games. Their homes.
Sounds like a church, by the way.
And she said, so what we decided to do is if we don't have kids coming, we're not involved in kids, we're losing our jobs. So I just told that to the students. I said, you figure out your kids involved with Parks and Rec, you're not gonna have a job. And so it was teenagers they hired, took the Park and Rec stuff, balls, hula hoops, equipment, flags, capture the flag stuff. And they went through parks, they call them pop-up parks, where they go to just an empty lot in a neighborhood. And they announced on this day, we're gonna have a pop-up park because it was a novel things, kids showed up. Now, usually they'd have 100 kids show up at Parks and Recs, they'd have 20 kids show up at the pop-up park. And they do a different pop-up park every day. And they would hit the same neighborhood a few times in the summer, okay? And they're all super successful. And she goes, we decided, let's try to, maybe that would get interest back to the Parks and Rec Center. And she said, we tried to do something at the center and it was a little bit better than it was, but it's still kind of pretty poorly attended. So we just stuck with the pop-up parks. She said, but we don't have enough people to run them. Even just have an adult sitting there to provide some supervision where kids won't fight, or we'd love to have people do that. And they don't have to do anything, just show up and be a friendly face. Like, okay, old people can come show up and be a friendly face. This church is mostly elderly. They didn't know what they could do. They could go be at a park and be a friendly face. And then what you just said, Tom, I said, so you have a beautiful facility that was renovated 20 years ago, 15 years ago, that's got everything you need in it, and you can't get people to come into it. So you decided to go where they are. I said, that's a lesson of church. It really is. How they can figure that out, I don't know, but. And she said, this is exciting. I didn't even know there was a church in our area. Where is the church? I don't have it on my phone anymore. My phone dropped. It's next door to the Parks and Rec. The buildings aren't adjoining, because there's an alley between them.
She didn't know there was a church in the town.
She didn't know that church was there. It's in between the Parks and Rec is here, the church is here, the library is here. And she had never heard of the church. I went out front of the Parks and Rec and I took a picture. And the front door of the Parks and Rec, right next to it above it, is the steeple of the church. She walked past the steeple sometimes to go on the Parks and Rec. And when she didn't walk from that direction, she walked the other way where she's looking at it every day in her office space. I said, how long have you? I said, it's actually next door. She said, really? There's a church next door. And I said, yeah. I said, how long have you worked there? She said, about 8 years.
Oh my goodness.
And that told me something else about the church.
The church hadn't been out there.
It had not, and it made an impact in their community. And it looked exactly like a church. You couldn't say, well, it looked like something else, right? Because it looked exactly like a church. And in the old town. So So anyway, I thought that was an interesting thing. So she kind of became a person of peace in the moment. So we captured all that down and got it to the church. And unfortunately, the pastor felt like that'd be a waste of the church's time. But fortunately, there was a lady in the church that said, it's not a waste of my time. So she joined the Parks and Rec as a volunteer, senior volunteer, unpaid position. And she every summer goes out to the pop-up parks and she's ministering to kids in the park. So I wish I could.
Who named her pastor?
Huh? I won't talk about it. Anyway, so those are some things, these are different ideas of what you can do. That became something that could be done immediately. And I guarantee you, in all these situations, we found situations, we said, what could be done? They told us what could be done. And we've had feeding ministry start on it. We had that halfway house get started out of it, or benefit out of it. We've had just all kinds of ministries that started. Because you ask them what can be done, they're going to give you a concrete idea in many cases. I don't want to make it sound like every person we talked to was a person of peace and gave us opportunities. I said earlier, if we had people do this for at least 2 days, everyone met a person of peace. And that was true all the times I've done it. But that's over 2 days. You met one person. So there were lots of people you met with, it didn't go that direction. Okay. And we would send them out, and I like sending them out in different ways. The first way, you had people come back. Some people are excited because they had great conversations or had great observations or had great experiences. And some people come back like, well, that was a big dud. You know, when can I go back to Texas or go back home or whatever, you know? But then they go out the second time and they would have the conversation at that point. And then they come back just energized that they could go and do that. Okay. Let's look real quick at the 3 other areas, just to kind of talk through the questions, see if you have any thoughts about it. You can add to this list if you want, but these are just helpful tools. You want to know what the economic reality of the community is, because that helps you to understand how to reach it. So the question, the observations would be things like, what evidence of struggle, despair, neglect, and alienation do you see? What would that be? Maybe you live in a community where everything's brand new, everything's being built. There's not a building older than 20 years old. Or maybe you live in a community that's the exact opposite. You have boarded up windows and you have crack houses being burnt down, you know. So
Now you keep saying you live in a community, like the community that when I did the demographics on it, it's like, it's not my community, right?
yeah, I'm just throwing that out there.
Oh, okay.
It could be any, who are you targeting? What's your target community look like, you know? So it could be kind of anything.
So this is really like awesome. Like, it's funny because just to give you a backstory real quick, me and the wife, before I took this class, we had a 3-year plan, gonna save up money, start church on our own. Had no idea. Got in contact with everyone, hooked me up with these guys, got involved in this class, right? And it's like almost every class I come here, like when we did the demographics, right? I was like, okay, this is probably all I need, right? And I'm like, I'm gonna go do the demographics. This is gonna, and it worked, right?
And demographics are great. I use them all the time.
I have the area that now that has given me. I'm like, okay, this is the area. And not knowing, I'm not educated enough, not knowing that there's more that I can research, definitely make sure that's the area.
Yeah.
Right. And this is the next tool I needed. So,
And here's the interesting thing is, so I don't know if you're planning on planting the church or you're got a team of people helping you plant the church. But if you get people that want to help you plant a church and they can be part of this, and they're helping to do the observations and have the conversations, that's going to buy them in deeper. And it's going to present to you your opportunities. And it's going to be in a way that you didn't coerce. Because you've probably already thought of some good ideas of how you can reach that community, right?
Right.
You wouldn't be doing it sitting here if you weren't already thinking that way. And some of them may be great ideas. And some of them may be the ones the Lord's got for you, but he may have something else in store. I know in my life, my ministry, there's been plenty of things happen that I was like, well, I didn't see that happen. And God just gave me a left turn, you know? Or it could be confirmation of what the Lord has been doing up to that point, you know? So it becomes a good tool.
So I thought it was interesting what you just said right now, because I was thinking total opposite. I was thinking of bringing outsiders like the bike group, right? Broken Chains, bringing them because, you know, they're in Waco and they're in San Antonio. They're not in New Braunfels, right?
Right.
Our core group all live and breathe in New Braunfels, right? So they might have their blinders on, just like I possibly might have. So that's what was my idea, was bringing those people in.
We've done it where we integrated the two together.
Okay.
But let the outsiders lead.
You get different perspectives from
Because we only have 6 of us. Our core group is 4 plus me and my wife 6.
So you can bring the 6 in, but bring the biker guys, all the other people from outside, and let them lead this. Because they're all your supporters. They want to hear what's going on with it.
Right.
And then it lets your group also allow other people to serve you, which is humbling. And it also allows the process to happen a little bit more organically than a little bit forced from your perspective? Because you already see New Braunfels in a certain way.
Right.
These guys may not.
One of the things that I've really been trying to clarify with people today is when we say the word community, that used to have basically one definition. And that was, a 4 or 5 block radius around our church, or a 1 mile radius, or whatever you wanted to do around there. But when you live in a smaller town, and when I say smaller town, like Temple's got about 80,000 people, and it's bordering town and city. It's
Right.
not big enough. So the deal is that people will drive past 15 churches to go across town to your church. And so defining community is now something that you have to define, because it doesn't mean the same thing. And so like our church is targeting around our community groups, like a 4 or 5 block radius around a community group. But we may have a community group on the east side of Temple. We may have a church member that lives on the west side of Temple. So we're targeting around where our community groups are. And that's where diversity comes in, socioeconomical, it comes in. If you target it around our church community, we live in one of the most drug infested, transient, all the homeless prostitutes on the street corner. That's where we're meeting.
Can
That's
I
not
just take over your church then?
Well, on that note, let's just jump to the spiritual real quick. Okay. Because I want to talk about that for a second. Well, this is a good point. So when you get to the spiritual side of it, it could work to speak to church folks. It may not necessarily be church folks. For the observation part, you're going to be looking at what church, from the churches you've discovered, are they growing, declining, or maintaining? You can't really see that when you're observing it. But you can. I mean, we had an area, so Tacoma's got a lot of churches there. A lot of them, some big, gigantic, beautiful churches built in the late 1800s that are rival churches you see in the Northeast or in Europe. And you think, oh, wow, why are there any more churches? Then you go inside them and it's an AA meeting, which is wrong with that. They ain't a church.
Or it's a theater.
Or it's a theater. There's one of them is a theater. And so they're beautiful structures, but if you look at it, you think it's a church, but it's not. It's a community center now.
Right.
Something else, okay? So that helps you to see what it is. When you go through this lesson, one of the things we found is in the town. So this is when we start putting pieces together. So you talked about New Braunfels. What is community? The town where the halfway house was had quite a few good churches in it. And one of the questions we began to ask is, what's your average age in attendance? What type of outreach do you offer? What's the most important lessons you've learned? What I like the question is, what is your church doing well? Okay, it's a general question. They can give their answers to it, right? And we found that there were probably 3 significantly sized, healthy churches in that community. But what they all did well was reach families. And as they began to describe what their churches accomplished, and as we all began to hear this move to do something with this halfway house, the community of ex-cons that were attached to it, there was a miss. And these churches weren't doing anything wrong. They were doing good work. At least 3 of them were. The other churches nearly did, but these 3 were doing good work, but they weren't doing this work. And it helped that pastor figure out, oh, this could be a place of impact for us that no one else is doing.
Right.
And we're not rivaling these guys. We're not judging them. They're doing good ministry, but it's going to take all of us to do the ministry. I can't go and pastor a Korean church.
Right.
I just can't. I don't speak Korean. I don't understand the culture well enough, although my kids love K-pop. I can sing some songs on some Korean now, but that's different than pastoring a Korean church. All right. I really cannot say something now. It's crazy. But so that's when you do the spiritual side of it. We start realizing what the community has and what's lacking. That's what can help you figure out your piece to it as well. So that's where having those guys come. And here's the thing is, and this is the honest truth, prepare yourself for something you're not expecting. That pastor never once it crossed his mind to reach that community. And it wasn't the only thing he did. It wasn't even the largest part of what he did, but it became a somewhat significant part of his ministry. But we've had other pastors do things and figure out, oh, wow, we're called to do something they never imagined doing. We've got one church, he did this whole process. He killed his church. He's still a friend of mine today. He's not mad at us or anything like that. He lives in a city called Sunnyside. It's near Pasco, Richland. It's the Tri-Cities area of Washington. That area is about 90% Hispanic now. And he did all the research. He realized if someone's going to reach my community, his community is about 95% Spanish speaking. He doesn't speak a word of Spanish. He doesn't even like Mexican food. That was his joke. And he realized he wasn't the person to reach his community. He ended up gifting, it got down to just a handful of people, and they all universally agreed. They gifted their church to Hispanic church planting. Just free and clear. Gave them the building. They said, can we continue to meet as a small group in your church? And I mean, there's a lot of churches who wouldn't do that. Ask yourselves if you do that. I'd have a hard time thinking about, I'm just going to give away my building that we've had for 80 years, more like 60 years.
I was the church we were in.
And the pastor lost his job in the process, by the way. And the church had got down to lower numbers. We had enough money. He could have kept his job for a couple of years. They gave all the money to the Spanish speaking church.
Wow.
He had to go find another job. Because he realized through this process, I'm not going to be the one to reach this community, but he can.
Selfless sacrifice.
And they started a church that today runs about 100 people. Not always. Not after COVID, it's back up to about 70 now. It did run 100, and then they got down to a few. But anyway, that came through a process of just realizing. So you may realize, hey, we're supposed to do this ministry, or maybe a little different than you expect, but in this process. We won't necessarily read through all, but that came through the spiritual. We figured out there are good churches and communities. You're not going to be the first person to bring the gospel to your town. I tell people coming into Seattle, we're unchurched. We're a very low church area. But you're not the first person to bring the gospel here. Jesus just didn't figure out Seattle existed yesterday. All right. The Holy Spirit's known about it since before anyone lived there, right? God's been at work all the time. And so there may be people doing what you're doing well. This process may help you figure out what your niche is in that. You know, that makes sense?
So God reveals needs in the process of our engagement with the community.
There you go. That's right. Well, I'm going to wrap this up. I don't want to take too much of your time. You can read through all these questions. They're all good stuff in here, the implementation, stuff like on here. I will say this last, turn to this sheet. This one's got the boxes on it. This is a primitive way of capturing the material. I said it's important you capture the material. What we try to do is we have a talking session after the last time they go out and ask these questions. And we always have prayerful time. There were some times that got very emotional because people now all of a sudden after 2 or 3 days of walking through a community, even though they're from somewhere else, they feel like they care about this community. They know this community, okay? And if you do this with your church, and you don't, I mean, maybe on a Wednesday night instead of a Bible study once a month, just your team go out and do stuff. Just do some observations, do some conversations. But what you do is you gather the data and then sit down and talk through it. And then you see where it says, you know, social climate. And you do this for each of them. I just did one printout, but do it for each of them. The social climate, the economic climate, their spiritual climate. You may find your church, your town is, the town you've targeted all along is super spiritually covered. And it may rock your world to find out God doesn't really need you to plant a church in that town. But 8 miles down the road is a different story. And that's when you overturn the apple cart. That might get people mad. I don't know. That's when they came up with the strategy of 1684, because they do this initial and that's Jesus, and they feel like, okay, it turns into 4 church plants because you narrow out some stuff as you zero in on others. But you basically write down the place and stuff, and then you write down all the observations that are, as you talk to a group, what was the important observations all you heard? And as people talk about it, then you all kind of figure out what are the most important ones, you write those down. Then the conversations, and then implementations. And it's interesting because when we sat down as groups to start doing this, it happened pretty regularly that more than one person observed the same thing. And that's when it really caught all of our attention. Yeah, I had that happen too. The halfway house was the biggest example of that. A couple of people had one in the fire department, a couple of them had others, but that was the biggest. It's the only time that everyone heard the same thing in some form or another. But when you all hear the same thing, I take that as a moment, maybe God's speaking, so pay attention to that. But even if a couple of people are, 2 people are, 3 people are, something like that, just see what's it's worth exploring of it, and then write all these things down. And then if you're the guys that are doing it, capture the information and use it. Now I'm sitting there as the leader, I'm writing everything down. I had a whole other notebook. I'm just writing down as much as I can. And my scribe is too, that in case she was the one capturing in that situation. But then what we did is we usually did this for a pastor. So we didn't actually 3 of the events, so we did this for the pastor didn't go out with us. And so I handed him something and said, here are the stuff you can do. And we gave him, by the way, when I say write down stuff here, we had phone numbers, business cards that were given to us, exact locations, hours. We set up appointments for people to meet. I had the information from the Parks and Rec person. And so we were able to hand all that over to whoever's going to be planning the church in that community. And one of the things we found is if you wait a long time after you do this to follow up on those contacts, they get real cold real quick.
Immediacy.
So we would tell the people, please contact them as soon as possible. We'd like to know how it works out. It always can't, some people say, yeah, I'll work with you, and they really don't. But most of these people are sincere and they did work. The best example we had of all of that was actually the fireman. Because we gave this up to the pastor and he did follow up with them, and he did the 4th of July parade. And I think the fireman actually became part of the church. And that does happen. Sometimes you get church members out of the Exegete. So that's a lot of information.
Closest proximity and very timely.
But what questions or comments do you guys have about kind of this process, how we use it? It's just a tool. It's the Spirit that's going to be the one doing the work. It's a little bit more than just looking at the demographic data, which is useful. I do that, but it takes some effort getting involved. One other thing it did that we found is it got people who don't know what to do engaged. There's a lot of church members that would love to help you out somehow. You say church plants and this glazed look goes over their eyes. What? I can't play guitar. No, but can you just go meet some people and ask some questions? And that's for the guy that collected the voter registration, did the voter registration stuff. That's where he's like, I can do that. I'm not good for much, but I'm good for that. So people can get involved in that. And then they hear, oh, you just need someone to drive students to the park once a quarter. I can do that, you know. So it gets a way to get people engaged in what you're doing. Okay. Now, honestly, you guys were very attentive, you're very interested. If you throw all this at a small group of people the first time, it might overwhelm them. But if you just simply say, hey guys, I want to try something. Heard about this thing, I want to do this observation. And just throw that out. I just want us to go out and observe our community each time. And then the next week or a few weeks later, say, hey, remember we did the observation thing? I want to follow up on that. I want to have some conversations. Here's some suggested questions. I just want to see how this goes. And it never hurts to say, hey, let's see how this works. Because if it doesn't work out, okay. If it does work out, great. That's how I've approached it. We're doing this, so I'm in part of a replant myself. So the first church plant I was ever part of was, can I say this out loud? It was 25 years ago. My first church plant. And I'm in my newest church plant. It's a church. I'm an interim pastor right now at a church that we're replanting this year, at the end of this year. And we're going to be doing this in our community. And we feel like we know our community. I've lived in it for 7 years, but it's constantly changing. Like I said, we have 3 Asian grocery stores, a huge one called H Mart. We have a huge Spanish grocery store, and we're going to figure out our community. I feel like I know it, but I don't know that I know it. And it's changing constantly around us, but we're going to go. We're in between a high school and a middle school. We're going to figure out how we connect to those. We've got an apartment complex down the street, probably has 500 or 600 people living in it, and most of them are refugees. We're going to figure out how to reach those folks, you know. So we're going to do the same thing ourselves. Any questions, comments, or complaints you guys have?
Is this like something that you should actually do?
Yeah.
Maybe a couple of years, you know.
It sounds like a lot, but just getting out and doing it, it's a lot less threatening. It really is. And anyone can do this. And by the way, this is my honest truth. The best people that I've seen that do this, I don't know why, are elementary school teachers. If you get any elementary school teachers in your neighborhood, in your church, they do better at this than anyone else. For some reason, they do the best job.
So I just wanted to say one thing to our Uganda partners. I know you were limited on software type demographics. Probably going to do more of what we talked about tonight. So I sent all of the PowerPoint, all of the worksheets that we were going through tonight. So hopefully this will benefit you as more of a hands-on approach, because it will be your demographics. So I just wanted to say that. And Brother Tom would like to just add something before we close.
I'm not going to speak for long.
That's fine.
Everybody's tired. I'm going to give you just a slight Texas twist on it, and maybe New Mexico. So he mentioned that there's about 3 to 4% now that are church in the Northwest. Let me just tell you what the numbers are in Texas. They are much worse than we expect. 27% of people in Texas identify with a church home. 13% on a good Sunday before COVID would be on church on Sunday. So we're talking about Texas. We're not talking about anywhere else in the country. 27%, a quarter of Texans identify with the local church home. Now, 40% beyond that, this is where it's different than the Northwest. Another 40 or 50% will say they are Christians. They say they're Baptist or Methodist or Catholic. They've been in church once upon a time. They have that heritage. They don't think it's a bad idea. So they have some kind of residue of church, which isn't necessarily, it's good and bad. They've even been saved. They might say it when they were 6 at Vacation Bible School. But they can't remember the name of the church, right?
Baptized.
Yeah, and maybe got baptized, and maybe they didn't, but you know those folks. So while that's good, they have a bridge that you can build on. So that's a positive. But they also comes with some baggage. So just be aware of that in Texas. You hear those numbers in the Northwest, you think that's just nobody goes to church. We're better than that, and there's some difference to it. But it's not like 90% of people go to church here. Y'all know what I'm talking about. It's probably our own families, right? It's our own cousins and nephews and nieces and siblings and children and grandchildren. They're in that same boat. Ours are. We've got a family member, very close family member, just like my family doesn't go to church anymore, but we believe in God. Okay, well, I'm the king, so they're not Christian. And to add to that, and then I'll shut up and quit. I was in a meeting with the Tarrant Baptist Association, that's the county of where Fort Worth is, and I was with a group of pastors, there's about 50 of us there. And Becky Beiser, do you know Becky? She got up and asked me one time, she goes, I just have a question for y'all, and she's one of the most spiritually lifting, great spiritual people I've ever known. She's looked at us and she goes, how many of you pastors, and we're some pastors of prominent churches in the Fort Worth area, Fort Worth, Keller, Southlake, North Richmond Hills, Haltom City, Watauga, White Settlement, Burleson, all those towns with pastors there. How many of you pastors, 40 or 50 of us, know the mayor of your town? And not a single one of us knew the mayor. A couple of guys knew some previous mayors, but they elected a new guy and they didn't know the new guy. How many of y'all know the chief of police? Not a single one of us in the chief of police. How many of y'all know a police officer in your town? 4 or 5 of us raised our hand. How many of y'all know a fireman in your town? 4 or 5 of us raised our hand. How many of y'all know the superintendent of your local school districts? We have 35 school districts in Tarrant County. Not a single one of us in the superintendent level. How many of you know the principal of local high school? 5 or 6 of us did. We're pastors some pretty prominent churches. So I started telling the churches, you've heard these churches. And she said, guys, how are you making a difference with the leaders in your community when you don't know the leaders in your community?
On that note, every one of these we've done, we met the mayor or city manager every time we did.
That's what we did with Becky's challenge.
Yeah.
And I went and had lunch
We met
with the
with
mayor.
police chiefs.
I had the lunch with the superintendent. I called our area state representative. And I said, hey, I'm a pastor of this church. She goes, oh, would y'all come over to my office? She started to come over to my office. And I said, okay. What do you want? I said, I just want to kind of connect. She said, okay. And I get in there and I'm kind of apologizing. I'm sorry I'm taking up your time. I know you're so busy. People say that to you as pastors, right?
Yeah.
And you're like, no, that's what I'm here for. She goes, no, it's my job. I'm representing you. I want to talk to you. So we talked a little while and talked about what she can do at our church and invited her to the church. I'd love to come. I'm a Christian. I'll come to your church. And she's excited about it. I said, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I took up your time. I need to go. She goes, please don't go. I don't have anybody to talk to. That's what she said to me. I thought, well, that's just weird now. We're in a weird situation. Representative, she says, I sit in my office all day and I love for people from my constituency to just come in my office and talk. It shocked me. And I'm here thinking, no, she's too busy for me, right? So maybe your representative will be gracious and want you there. Maybe they're bozo, they don't want you. I don't know. But you'd be surprised, at least try.
Right.
So, and that's in a state where they're still friendly to the gospel for the most part.
But yeah, something else to tell? Oh, okay.
I don't know if anybody said that, but you two guys look so.
Just a little bit. It was really Tim going up there twice.
Yeah, don't tell Tom Henderson, but he thought he was talking to Tom and he was talking to Tim. And then he looked back there and kind of.
I had a meeting with Tom Henderson one time set up with Tim, and Tom Revilla was in it, and then Tim Randolph was the DO in Waco, and Tim Morrow was going to be in the meeting.
Oh,
You know, Tim.
wow.
So it's going to be Tim, and Tom meeting.
Right. So, one thing I can say is I cannot honestly tell you that I personally met our mayor. But I do know where Nuevo Leon Mexican restaurant is, and you have to order your food in Spanish. My wife says it doesn't smell good in there and she can't eat Mexican food while they're cutting meat. But it doesn't bother me at all. It's a big saw and when it gets turned on and they're cutting, so she can't handle that, but that was just a joke. Priorities, right? I don't know the mayor, but I know where the good Mexican food is. So, anyway, I want to tell everybody in Uganda, good morning. It's probably very early in the morning there, but hopefully this will have been helpful for you, especially since this is going to be more of your demographic study.
Well, we're starting Ugandan church
Really?
at the end of this year in our community. Not our, in our region.
Okay.
We had 2 Swahili started this year.
Good. I don't know if you heard that Brother Tim said that they're starting a Ugandan church in their area. So I think that's absolutely incredible. Didn't you do some work in Africa? North Africa.
Algeria, Tunisia, Morocco.
Okay.
Spend a lot of time in Somalia. It's like that.
All right. Well, let me dismiss us in prayer, and you're going to like Tim really well because he let you out earlier than anybody has. I think. So let's pray together. Lord, we thank you so much for tools and for those who have been called to equip the saints for the work of service. And Lord, that's our desire, is to be instruments in your hands, Lord, to go to the people. And that was your command to us, go out into the world. And Lord, I just pray that this will not only be helpful, but will be applied, that we will learn our communities better, that we will seek persons of peace. Lord, even now, I pray that you will go before our churches, go before these guys in the room with your spirit and begin to prepare those persons of peace. And then, Lord, empower us to speak to people with a humbleness and a boldness at the same time. We thank you for Texas Baptist. We thank you for Bell Baptist Association and for the Act Center. And just pray, Lord, that you continue to bless us and keep bringing us new tools to reach out with your gospel and to push back the darkness, to make a difference all around us. And so, Lord, thank you for who you are in our own lives, and may our lives be an offering back up to you. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Carl, I have one more thing to ask.
Okay.
This is not to say that to ask, all right? If you use this, and you can use this any way it works for you, okay? I basically memorized these questions. I don't even use the papers. I just ask them when I'm out and about, right? But if you use this and you find it helpful, would you let me know that? Is this helpful to know if this is useful?
Contact information.
No, not mine. I'll give you mine right now. Can I write it on the board?
Yeah, right on the board. Right on the board.
Okay. I meant to bring all my cards. On a trip and forget something, like, I will not forget it. And
That was an important.
it's all sitting on my